Welcome back to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, where you'll find information on what's going on the North Fork of Long Island. We'll be focusing on issues and opportunities going on in the community, as well as people and stories from the present and the past. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 24, we have Carlos DeJesus. He's been a lifelong resident of Greenport and is one of the Village of Greenport historians, and is the former president of the Sterling Historical Society. And we talked to him about his ancestry going back on Long Island and his parents and grandparents growing up out here, and also his childhood growing up out here and what he thinks of the North Fork and Greenport today. So I hope you enjoy episode 24 with Carlos DeJesus. So you were born and raised in Greenport?
I was born and raised in Greenport. Born in East Long Island Hospital back in 1953. Yeah.
And so what are the earliest ancestors you know? Is it from your dad's side that has been, the ancestors go way back?
The early ancestors that I know of in my family, on my father's side, in Greenport, are the Sells family. Sells. They came to Greenport in the early 1840s. Okay, and they came from Setauket. And I didn't find this out until way later. Until more than 30 years ago, maybe I found out. And they when I started doing the family genealogy the old-fashioned way before we had all this electronics,
computers and stuff.
We had all this stuff, and I heard to my aunts, mostly my aunts. My father was one of 12, and he had there was 4 boys and 8 girls. So, that on my father's mother's was a descendant of the Indians. Local Indians. Well, they always said it was a Blackfoot. And I said, no, that's not right. To me, I said, Blackfoot Indians? There are Blackfoot Indians. There is such a people. Not here. No, I found that out.
Yeah.
Okay, they were descendants of the Montucket tribe and the Nisqually tribe. I did find that out. And they came to Greenport in the early 1840s during the whaling era of Greenport. They came from Setauket. And they also found out that many of the Montuckets fled Montauk in that same time. It's in a book done by Gano Stone through the Stony Brook University Archaeology. And she did a study. I met her. She was a wonderful person, very knowledgeable. Really, her and another guy from Southampton, I think, did the study for the university about the indigenous people of Long Island.
Yes.
And you might have these books here. I don't know.
I think we do.
There's a 3-volume set, and they do mention Greenport. And Greenport's 2 areas of indigenous people. One was Bridge Street, which were the Hannibals, and one was 2nd Street, which were the Sellses and Januaries. Harriet January and her family lived next to the Sells family. Now, the Sells family bought that house in 1840, I want to say 2 or 3, I can't remember. But the owners of the house still have the paper, and still our ancestors are the original owners. They live in Illinois, but they've always maintained since back then, although they haven't lived here all that while. But still, that's the earliest I can put my family here in the village of Greenport.
And you said they came from Setauket?
Setauket and Nisqually, which is right next to each other. Okay, so Stony Brook, Setauket, and Nisqually River. And the Sells family is an English family that back in the late 1700s, I want to say it is, they bought the land, they owned all the land that's what became Brookhaven, and they had African American and Native American people working as slaves there. So there was a woman, can't remember her name. When the internet started, I started posting, asking for information about the Sells family. Well, somebody replied, and this woman, God, I'm terrible in remembering. But anyhow, Carolee. Okay, but anyhow, she is a descendant of that family. Mm-hmm. So she did her family, the Sells family, that lived there.
Tracked it back to the trip.
Right. Yes. And then she gave me some papers about my ancestors that lived and worked on the farm and when they were given their freedom. I have copies of those papers. She gave them to me. And so, yeah, I looked at my own research and I found Sells in that area. Jeremiah Sells, when he passed away in late 1800s, he was a minister of some kind, and he, in his obituary, says that he has two nephews, and this is in the newspaper, two nephews that lived in Greenport by the name of Sells. Ira Moses Sells and his wife, Mariah, it's pronounced Mariah Cuffey Sells. So the Cuffeys came from Montauk. And when I did the research, I couldn't put together the Cuffey Montauks and the Cuffey Shinnecocks. They're probably related, somewhere way back, but that's where the originals came from. And my grandfather came to Greenport in 1916 or 15. He came to Long Island from Puerto Rico in 1903, I think it was. Him, his older brother, and his older sister.
That was on...
my father's father.
But your father's mother?
Right. We're the native.
But then your father's father was from Puerto Rico.
Right.
And came in 1903.
Somewhere around 1903, give or take. There are records of them on the ship and stuff, whether it was the first one or not. Mm. The story goes that he was only about 10 years old. Okay. My grandfather, when he came, he had an older brother and older sister, only a couple of years older. Mm-hmm. And they worked for the Case Wells family in Peconic on Indian Neck Lane. Mm-hmm. They had a large farm there. So the minister was in Puerto Rico. They lived, I did trace them in Puerto Rico. They lived on a plantation, a sugar plantation. So the Case Wells people were friends with the people who had the plantation in Puerto Rico. And that's how they got he said the family needed some people to work in the house. Somebody to do millinery or whatever else, house cleaning. They were only kids, little kids. They might have worked out in the field, I don't know. Yeah. But that's what the story goes. And then he grew up in Peconic and then eventually moved to Greenport as he got to be a little older and met my grandmother.
Why did he move from Puerto Rico?
He moved from Puerto Rico. The three of them came together, moved from Puerto Rico to work on the farm.
On the North Fork?
Yeah, in Peconic.
But he didn't know anyone.
Nope.
It's just like, I'm coming to
No. The minister, the local minister, was down there and I guess recruiting. Who knows? Mm-hmm. That's how he got here. The three of them. And then I find out later there's another part of his family that lived in Greenport prior to that. Lived in Greenport. Her name was Catalina de la O. She came from Puerto Rico in the same area. They were relatives. Mm-hmm. She was much older than that. Catalina de la O. She lived on Bridge Street. All right. So now there was the house is still there on Bridge Street. It's been totally renovated and looks nice. As a kid, when I would go over there and visit her with my father, it looked scary.
Yeah.
It was scary. And she married a local guy, and then there was a two-family house that's side by side. And my father's other Aunt Mary Williams, she married a guy named Hannibal. He was a Montucket.
Mm-hmm.
He was a descendant of the Montuckets, Hannibals. And then they had kids, a couple of boys, and they lived in the house for years. Right. So they Catalina married a Hannibal, also, I believe, Isaac Hannibal or George. I can't ever get this straight. So they lived, and that's where the two Native American neighborhoods were, and they both part of my family going back.
And your grandfather met your grandmother in Greenport?
Yes.
Were they live? They were in the same neighborhood?
Yeah. My father, no. Second Street is where my grandmother lived with her family.
Okay.
Second Street, and that was between North and Broad, I think. And my grandfather lived on Fifth Street, just two doors down off Fifth Street, main Front Street. Okay, so they lived there, and he had a house there. So he was a Bayman,
Mm-hmm.
and so were all his wife's brothers were Bayman, going back to the whaling days. So we have some pictures of my grandfather in his boats, and it said Glenwood Sells. He was the guy who taught Pa. That's what he was known, or Captain Ben, the fishing, how to fish and so on and stuff. So yes, and then he acquired several boats, small fishing sloops, draggers, and so on. And he made a living at it, So then, well, like others, he ventured into some of the rum running days.
Yeah.
Everybody did.
Yeah.
Everybody did. If you had a boat and you were out in the water, chances are you were probably picking up a bushel or two of stuff, So, yeah, he did.
To make some extra money.
Oh yeah, mm-hmm. Sure. They all did. Mm-hmm. So did, I won't mention their names, but a lot of the other fishermen around here did. And business owners did. And some of them did good by it, some of them didn't. And some of them didn't last very long. It's an illegal business. And you had to deal with the feds. You had to deal with the Coast Guard. And people got killed. They're shooting. They're out trying to outrun them. Mm-hmm. And stuff. That's a whole different ballgame.
But did you get to talk to your grandfather?
Oh, yeah.
What did he say?
Oh, yeah. Because I grew up across the street from his house.
Okay.
He owned a house on the east side of the street, and we were just across the street. So he said, one day, I'll never forget this. One day we were in the living room watching TV. There used to be an old program on called The Untouchables.
Yes.
With Elliot Ness.
Yes.
What was his name? What was the actor's name? Elliot Ness. So, at the beginning of the show, it was black and white. You would see cars racing down the street and the cops behind them hanging out their window with Tommy guns shooting. And I never forget my grandfather said, "Hey, that looks just like Greenport back in the day." I'm kind of like, okay, Gramps, but it was actually like that.
Yeah.
The boats would come into the port and the feds were waiting for them, and they were chasing them down the street, shooting at them. That wasn't uncommon. Back in the road.
Kind of like the Wild West.
Yeah.
With some of that stuff.
Yeah, well, Greenport was the Wild West back in the 1800s. There were shootouts in Greenport. It's just nothing new.
Yeah.
But when you had whaling boats and lots of young people from all over the world, the United States, coming to work on these boats to make their fortune, they were out to sea for a year. They came back to Greenport. They had to let loose.
Yes.
Okay, so what they do, you're young, you're in your 20s, teens, whatever, you're having drinks, you're arguing with your buddy, and before you know it, you're getting in trouble. That's nothing new. They got on their horse. Greenport was a racetrack. Main Street from the wharf all the way up to the church was actually a racetrack.
What do you mean? Like
They raced horses.
really?
Yeah. Yeah, there's stories in the old newspapers. They raced stories. And then over by, when that started to get developed later on in the 1800s, after whaling and so on, before the car, there was a oval racetrack back behind where 7-Eleven is. But now it was called, it just went out of my head. But yeah, that was a race, that was a horse track.
Yeah.
An oval horse track, like with thoroughbreds, people with lots of money had horse farms. They came from all over the island in New York to race their horses and bet. There's stories in the paper where there were 2,000 people there. Imagine that, in the old days. But that's the way it was. And then that's why there were so many blacksmiths. Okay, every shipyard had a blacksmith. There were blacksmiths everywhere. The livery stables. There's lots of livery stables. So it's a natural progression.
What did your grandfather say? Because you said he worked as a
bayman.
How did he tell you about how it was working as a bayman?
Yeah, hard work. Yeah, you did everything by hand. There was no pneumatic this or that, everything was done by hand.
And was it just you go out at a certain time and you come back whenever?
They knew it. They knew. I asked him one day, I said, sorry, scallop season is now. How do you know where to go? He didn't have electronics on the boats. They had like your survey maps, whatever, the navigation maps. They would mark a spot. Okay, so yeah, they knew. They knew the seasons, and they knew that the scallops, the lobsters, the oysters, they knew that these animals, whatever fish, they traveled. And they knew the seasons and the waters and the temperatures and which way they would go. So I said, how do you know where to go? He said, we know. And the fishermen would talk to each other. It's no secret. One guy did it. And then when he did it, it was by sail only. No motors. You had to sail. You had to sail. So you were not only a bayman, but you were a sailor. You had to know how to navigate by sail. He didn't go far. Up Bay, Gardner's Bay, out east and west. He did say they ventured out into the Sound, but I don't think they ventured out into the ocean. Might have. Yeah. I know he did say he went around the point and they would go out in the Sound. Wherever the fish were, they followed. That was it. And they got there. There was I don't think there was a limit. Oh, you were limited by how much you could put in your boat.
Yeah.
Or you sank.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what he said.
And did he say what he did after work? He'd come back and just
after work, you sleep.
Sleep.
Yeah, I always wonder why my grandfather did that, but I think they all did that.
Mm-hmm.
They all did that. The barter system has been going for a long time. So they all did that. And you get a little extra here and there, and that was how they lived. Mm-hmm. I do have my dad's in the 30s, his school. And I said to myself, well, I kind of thought, was he really a bayman back then? But I have his school report card from Greenport School in the 30s when it was in the old building. Mm-hmm. He was like in 6th grade. I think my dad was in 6th grade. It was a 6th grade report card. And sure, that was his dad, father's name, Benigno, and DeJesus, and occupation, bayman. Mm-hmm. That was in 1932, I think it was. I have it home somewhere. And that's same with his brothers and sisters. He was a bayman. When I was getting into the 60s, when I was a little guy, 10 years old, 12 years old, I used to go out with my uncles on the boats, and that was always fun. Mm-hmm. That was always fun. Here I am, this little guy. My mom would say, pack a lunch, a little thermos, go out, And I'm just the extra guy there. My grandfather would say, "You watch him." I don't know what would ever happen if I fell over or whatever, but
Yeah.
But it was always fun,
Mm.
to go out with them guys.
Yeah.
They were uncles and cousins.
Yeah.
Uncles were older than obvious, and then their sons were probably 10 years older than me,
Mm-hmm.
at least. But it was always interesting,
Yeah.
to go out. I would love to. I did it in 80, 81, 82, 80, 81. I think I did it. I went out sea scalping. And when somebody asked me to do that, I said, I gotta go. I'm single. Well, not I was single. I was only married a couple of years. And I said, I gotta go.
Yeah.
I gotta go see what life is like in the ocean,
Mm-hmm.
scalping. It's hard work. And actually, it's hard work, but it was easier than the predecessor.
What was it previously?
It's doing the same thing on different types of boats. Boats I worked on were steel boats and stuff.
Compared to
the wooden boats. They
boats.
called them Eastern trawlers. They rocked literally. You were doing this back and forth,
Mm-hmm.
rocking, and they had to. Whereas when I worked on it, it did, but not
Mm-hmm.
as bad as those. I'm sure not as bad. I've seen some pictures of those,
Mm-hmm.
films of those, the way they did it. They were tough.
Mm-hmm.
That was hard work.
Yeah.
And even going back to the earlier bunker or Manhattan days, I
Mm-hmm.
could just imagine what life was like for them. Now, my grandfather did it when he was a young man, and his uncles did it on the whaling boats, going way back. That must have been a tough one. But Greenport was like any other port. It was a working port. Just the commercial area of the North Fork. There's no other place like it.
And did he ever say, your grandfather, did he ever say, because he did that all his life,
All his life.
he didn't say that he ever wanted to move away from Greenport?
No. I've never heard him say that.
Yeah.
Never. I don't think he ever wanted to. That was his life. He did it in all his life, even until he died in 1978, late 78, I think it was. And he was already in his 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And he still, to that day, he had friends that were old like him. They would come over and they would talk about the old days. That was it. He wasn't going anywhere. Even when he stopped actually commercial fishing, it was like everybody else back then. Okay, so commercial fishing, he had his own boat, but then again, seasonal, good or bad season, there were other larger ways to make money in the oyster industry, in the Manhattan industry. So he would, if the season was bad, he had to go still earn a living, and he went to work for them. So there was two at the end of 6th Street. The one at the end of 6th Street, one at the end of 5th Street where he lived. So one was the Ellsworth, and the other was Lester and Tona. And their job was to go open or move the shells. They would make 5 cents a barrel loading shells in a wheelbarrow on a boat. And then the boats would take them to Connecticut, where they were sold to another oyster company, and they used the shells for the oysters to attach to make seed oysters and stuff. And that was, he was lucky. I don't know how lucky, but there was another family that lived on 6th Street, the Ryder family, Al Ryder. He was my wife's great-grandfather, I think. And he sold my grandfather 2 boats. And Natalie Lucas and I think Clara Cummins. And they, he was an oysterman, and he worked at the shipyard and so on. So everybody did it, and they helped each other out. It was a good thing, and then they hear him say, oh, yeah. And there was another Swedish family, I think it was Swedish, Hansen. We have a picture of this old guy, Hansen, Ollie Hansen. And he was a machinist. He was a mechanic. So he lived down the end of 6th Street. And he would come over and work on the engines. He would come over and work on the boats as he was, if the motor needed tuning up, whatever. They were only small 4-cylinder engines. God, I wish I could have. He had 2 Ford flathead engines in the garage. They were mounted on big stock wooden skids, and they had winch heads on them. And the spark plugs were almost as big as this bottle of water. Really, they were much smaller. And they had magnetos. I don't know if you know the magnetos prior to the solenoid. Right, so they had magnetos. And that's what sparked the spark plugs. Okay, so you'd spin them over, and you could literally, if you grabbed a wire of a magneto and held it, and somebody spun the wheel, you were going to get a good shock, a really good shock.
Yeah,
but that's what sparked the spark plug. But he had them in the garage. I don't know whatever happened to them. But man, they were awesome. They would put them on the truck, take them up to the beach, hold the nets in from the beach in the 40s and the 50s, and then they finally, and that's when his sons, my uncles, my dad not so much, but he did it, in his younger days. But my uncles carried on a little bit longer than they did. But that was hard,
Did he ever say? Because you said he came over in 1906? 1903. Did he say that Greenport had its heyday and that when he got older, did he describe it's changed and it's not the same? Or
no, I don't
not
think
really.
So. No. His whole life was around the bay.
Okay.
Is fishing.
So it hadn't dramatically changed.
I'm sure it did. But when I want to say when you're a bayman, you're focused on one thing: keeping your commercial anyhow, keeping up your boat, keeping up your the who's catching what, where, when, the weather, and things like that. Selling, getting your product to the market and get the rest. And they still did that years. But no, he didn't. I never heard him say that.
Okay.
Other than, it hasn't been a good season for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I do remember him saying one time that concerning the fishing industry is that, it hasn't been a good year. So why? Well, it's because how do you say it? Not that they weren't there weather-wise, but we didn't have that runoff. This is in the 40s, in the 30s, and the 40s, and so on, in the 50s. So they didn't have the DDT and runoff the farmers used, the pesticide, whatnot, that really put a damper on all the growth in the bay that sustained life for the shellfish and so on. But I remember him saying that scallops, especially, traveled. Clams stayed still, I think. Oysters stayed in the same place. But scallops would move. They could be here this week, but they swim. They swim, by pushing out water, stuff like that, where clams embed themselves in the soil. And oysters attach themselves to shells and other things. Yeah. Same with mussels, attach themselves. And they catch whatever the tide brings by. But fish travel, seasonal, with the Gulf Stream. That's why certain times of the year you can catch some fish. So they knew, and I remember I could never get this right, but they always knew by the flower, whenever a certain flower was growing, that a certain fish was going to be coming up the bay. And once it came in, they would go out and catch, and then have to shift to a different species, and then wait till the end of the summer where the fish went back out, and then up to New England or wherever else, And you had to keep records of all of that, or these guys kept it in their head. They didn't, they knew. You could tell when it was going to be a bad winter. The old farmers and all that. You knew you were going to have a good crop because it was going to be. It rained so much, and farmers weren't very far off back then. Now, I don't know. I don't know so much.
Now it's all over the place.
It's just all over the place. So.
And then what about your grandmother?
My grandmother, unfortunately, my grandmother, my father's mother, she passed away in 60. I was like 9 years old. So I think
Oh,
60,
okay.
60 or 62. I
Oh,
was, I
okay.
was, I was very young when she passed away. But oh man, I remember as a kid going across the street, and I used to love to go over there. And she would have snacks. I always tried to do this, duplicate it, and I could never do it. She would make in the summertime juice, like Kool-Aid kind of juice, in a big jar. They called them with the red stripes. They had different stripes. Festiva ware, something like that.
Hmm.
Okay, but
Okay.
it's an old type of. It's a glass or a pitcher. She would put fruit in it. I didn't learn that until putting fruit into sangria.
Yeah.
Right? Because sangria's
Yeah.
got it's a what do you call it? It has fruit in it. But she used to put apples and oranges and stuff in it, and it was ice cold. And he had a little garden out
Hmm.
back. He would grow his own watermelon and stuff, and it was delicious,
Mm.
delicious. And then cookies and whatever else.
Yeah.
She always had a snack for everybody.
Would she make, do you remember her making any big meals?
Mm-mm.
No.
No, no.
Oh.
Although I do have, it's funny because I do have, my dad inherited this from her, I believe. I do have three different 50, I want to say 51, 55, and 56 diaries.
Hmm.
Diaries daily,
Oh,
diaries,
wow.
and day to day. It's sunny out. She described the day in handwriting, and it's really hard to read because it's neat, but
Hmm.
then again, they wrote differently. Their
In script?
penmanship,
In the script?
yeah,
Hmm.
their penmanship. It wasn't printed. Their penmanship and the way they wrote is different. And my dad used to do that too. His writing looked like artwork,
Yeah.
and I was like,
It's on a whole nother level compared to today.
so now, yeah, whole nother level. That's why when we were cleaning out their house, and I see papers, and I said, "Well, Dad wrote that down. You can
Yeah.
tell that's his
Yep.
writing." So same with my aunt, my grandmother.
Yeah.
In these diaries, she would write, today's January 1st, and
Hmm.
there's snow and it's cold, da da da.
Hmm.
So and so came out, to the end of the day. And it's sweet. Oh, well, Glenwood came home. He went out and got a couple chickens and plucked the feathers and got them ready. And, and because they had a chicken coop out in the backyard, and you go get some eggs. That scared the heck out of me. My grandmother and my grandfather would say, go out and get some eggs. We're going to have some breakfast. My grandpa, I don't want to go out there.
I'm not going out there to get that.
Because the chickens would peck at you.
Yeah.
But he just went out there and grabbed it, took 3 or 4 eggs, whatever, put in the basket, went to the next one, picked up a couple, just picked up the chicken. I'm like, and this chicken's going peck, peck, peck at my hand.
He's used to it.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, I'll just,
Yeah. It was just normal for them to do that,
Yeah.
And then one time, he was killing the chicken, and my mother, I think, because we lived across the street, came over and like, oh my God, and she was a little more. Although she grew up with the same thing in Mexico, but she grew up with my mother. We used to read as little kids. We got pictures of me and my sisters when we were only like 2 or 3.
Hmm.
In my grandmother's house in Mexico, but my grandmother raised pigs, and I did ask my aunts because they lived. My grandfather and my grandmother lived. The Selzes lived down on Johnson Court, which is down the end of 3rd Street, the last road. And my aunts would tell me that my grandfather, they would have pigs and things down there. He was asked by the village, because that's where the Greenport landfill was, or dump.
Where was it?
At the end of Webb Street. Okay. So when I was a kid, he used to keep his equipment there. His nets. The place was just covered in crushed shells. Okay, so that was the base. You could drive a car on it. That's how hard it packed. In a lot of places in Greenport, they would use shells, oyster shells, clam shells, scallop shells, whatever. And that packed hard, rock hard. And you could drive your car on it. He drove his truck on it. He had an old-fashioned truck. And he put his rowboats and everything else out there. And they would have pigs and chickens and all, whatever. And he would take care of them. That's when they were kids in the 30s. So in exchange for being the watchman for the landfill or whatever, it was a gentleman's agreement. You can keep your stuff here, but when you're here, you got to make sure keep an eye on what do you call it, and nobody comes in.
Yeah.
So it was. You go down to Webb Street, and then it goes down to a little hill. But and then people used to dump their garbage in, and then they closed that for a short period of time. They used Muscle Trail. Because back there's part of Silver Lake, and you don't want to dump in Silver. So it's a freshwater lake, So yeah, but it was a different. That was in my time. That was a change in time all around the village. I think a lot of other families did also had the same kind of. We'll give you the old-fashioned stories similar to that in different neighborhoods. That's just the way they were.
But with your dad's grandmother, your
Great,
dad's
great.
no, sorry, your dad's. When did your dad's mother move to Greenport?
On the south side in the early 1840s.
So your grandmother went to school in Greenport?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Right, they did. I don't know. I can find an occasional cells going. I know my grandmother, they were all musicians. They had their own little band or whatever you want to call it, They had their own troupe. They played in different occasions. I found in the early mid-1800s, Brooklyn Times, Brooklyn paper, where they would say the Young People's Association of Greenport. That's what they were called, the Young People's Association of Greenport. The minority people there are going to give a concert in Greenport at Sterling Hall or the auditorium. And they would charge people to come. So they did this for different organizations. They played. I remember as a little guy because my grandmother played for the silent movies.
Really?
Yeah, in Greenport. Yeah. Iolantha Sells, before she married my grandfather, she was Iolantha Sells. She was a young lady. I have it home. It was in the newspaper, the local paper. Don't worry, folks. Miss Iolantha Evangeline Sells will be back next week to play. She's visiting with friends in Brooklyn, and she would play. She had a piano. It was like, I don't know how to describe it. It just, her fingers the music just flowed. It was just, to listen to it, it's unbelievable. It just, the music, my dad tried to get my sister to take lessons at Catholic school. That didn't work out. But she did. And I know that her brothers, they all played instruments. And sang. They gave different types of shows for people. So that's going back in the 1800s.
Wow.
In Greenport. So they were all, and they all lived on. They had two houses. Well, the Sells family had the house. The first was on 2nd Street. The next one was on the corner of 3rd and Broad. The house is there. It's empty and pretty much getting in bad shape because all the people that used to live there or owned it are either well into their 90s. I occasionally see a guy I think he's from Patcho or somewhere around there, come out and do a little work around the yard. But unfortunately, I think it's not going to last much longer.
Oh.
It's been there for quite a while. But and they all. I did ask my aunts when they were growing up, because I couldn't ask their mothers or grandmothers. But what was life like? My aunt now, I have an aunt now still here in Greenport. She's 98. I think she's 98. Just had a birthday. She said that, and she's one of the younger of the family. Only older ones like my dad. If my dad was here, he'd be 102. But they said they all got along. Everybody. It didn't matter. They went to school together. They played together. Although there was still discrimination. There was a Sells family. He was an outstanding baseball player, Leon. He told me this. He was older than my dad. He told me this, and I have the picture of him on the team, in the Greenport team. They won their division, high school division, but he could not play in the county division playoffs because he was a minority, and that's in the 30s. He's probably around 36, 35, 36, somewhere around there.
But they didn't have separate leagues. They played locally, but then they wouldn't let certain people play.
Right. Although going way back, it was called the Greenport Driving Park. That was the racetrack. Although back then, in the 1800s, Greenport it was a ball field. They had games playing the New York City Giants, black team. African American team, the New York City Giants, I think it was. Okay, so they would come out and play. Okay. They drew 1,000 people who would come out to see them play local teams. But Greenport had its own minority team, and my family was half the team.
Yeah,
really,
wow.
They were half the team. Yeah, they were half the team. They all played on the baseball team. They played against these people and other people.
But it wasn't mixed.
No, it wasn't mixed.
Oh, okay.
No. I don't. There might have been, because at times these people played every week, all the time. They played and they traveled, and they there's one story that they traveled to play the Sag Harbor team, the Greenport minority team. Okay, I can't remember the name of the team, but they got on a boat, sailed to Sag Harbor. They left in the morning. By the time they got over there, a couple hours later, sailed to Sag Harbor, started playing them, and they were kicking butt. They were winning, and all of a sudden the weather changed, and they had to get back before it got dark, so they had to cut the game. And they never really finished the game. But the article says that the Greenport team was winning. So there was a little controversy there about why they didn't finish the game. It was weather, and they were sailing. They had to go back. They had to come back. You're not sailing in the dark with no lights, no nothing.
Yeah.
And this is in the 1800s.
Wow.
And then to come back to Greenport. And then they finished the game. So they kind of like blamed the umpires and this or that, but
they probably just wanted to stop it early because they were losing.
That's my guess. We'll never know. We'll never know.
But that's interesting.
It is.
And you said that while there still was discrimination and problems going on, you still think people, based off of what you've heard, people still got along pretty well. They went on and did their usual whatever they were working or that's interesting.
It is. It's funny because Greenport. About Henry Augustus Reeves in the newspaper.
Yes.
Okay, so he was the guy who published the Republican Watchman and brought it to Greenport in the late 1840s or something like that. And then during the Civil War, was arrested. Okay, he was an outspoken person for slavery.
Yes.
Okay, so although he spent his entire life in Greenport, he wrote in the newspaper why slavery was a good thing for the South.
Oh, okay.
And that got him in trouble. Okay, so, but then again, there was slavery here at the same time.
Yeah, whether he was talking about the South, there was still slavery.
Right. Slavery had ended years earlier in New York. Okay, so, but then again, he understood. He spent he was born in 1820 something, I think.
Okay.
Just when slavery just about ended in New York. So anyhow, it's kind of like, and even back then in the 60s, when you read, I read, as you know, I read tons of stories and papers and stuff like that.
Yes.
About Greenport. But it was a community where everybody got along. Everybody helped each other out. I'm sure there were different, differences among people, amongst themselves.
Yeah.
You don't have to be opposites. You could have your own family and your own neighborhood and there were a few of them that just notorious. I asked a friend one day, I'm not going to mention this name, but I asked a friend one day, I said, weren't you related to such and such family? And he goes, yeah, we were the bad apple, they were the good apples. I said, come on. He said, yeah. I said, well, okay. But then again, one part of the family were rough and tumble, the other part were more upstanding. Let's put it that way. And they were white families, okay?
Yeah.
So they were, I was like, oh, well, everybody has that. No matter where you go.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's still the way it was. But like if you're listening to, when I got to listen to that tape about the CD about life in Greenport, and come on, your whaling days, like we spoke of before, came in. These guys came off from a year of being away, and hey, civilization, as I know it, this was my home. I'm going to party, and they got carried away. Wow, doesn't that happen now?
Yeah.
The same thing happens now. It happened when I was growing up. I went out on a fishing boat for 2 weeks or a month or whatever, didn't come back. I headed right to Myers. I had money in my pocket and was going to have a few beers,
Yeah.
And that's just the way, young boys are. Men are.
Probably the work conditions were worse
back
then, so there's even more.
Well, no. You know what? I hear a lot of people say that. But then again, you know what? For them, it was good.
Yeah, whereas people for 2023, they'll look back at that and say, wow, that was... But for them, it's like, that's what it was.
That's all they knew.
Wasn't any... Like, oh, that's just what I'm working or doing.
Yeah, that's work. That's life on the open ocean and out on the bay and whatnot. That's where it was. Same with farmers. They did everything by hand and horse, and that was it. That's the way you live, So it's not like they had modern techniques. Well, when did Cyrus McCormick invent the reaper, the cotton gin, or whatever? Things like that.
Yeah,
that made life easier. Prior to that,
it
was done by hand, and you were tough. That's what it was. Let's face it.
Yeah,
and that's all they knew. Came home, they were happy.
Yeah.
On the weekends, they were happy. They had a few, beverages.
Yeah.
It
was just the way life was and what you did and how you relaxed. And
yeah. You didn't have electronics.
No, you didn't have that distracting you.
No, but you did have the auditorium was built in 1894, I think it was. The Opera House they were both around the same time.
Okay.
Right? But they had two other places called, before the Opera House was the Sterling Hall. Now, in the corner of 3rd Street, opposite the Peconic House, was the Belmont Hall or Military Hall. So there are other places where you could...
Entertainment.
Yeah, the old-fashioned way. Sit down, listen to music. A band would play. A famous singer would come to Greenport and play, and and stuff like that. And they did. They got on the train. The train was Greenport's spark of growth. 1844. After that, I don't want to say everything went downhill, but everything went uphill. Depends on how you look at it.
Yeah.
People came out by then.
It put Greenport on the map.
Easier. Prior to that, it took you days to get to Greenport. Then the train made it in 3 hours. Kind of like what it does now.
Still doing it now.
Kind of like what it does now.
Yeah.
I did a trip to the city the other day, a week before Christmas. Took me 4 hours to drive home from Manhattan.
Ugh,
Like traffic.
brutal.
Yeah. Where back then, the train took 3 hours.
Yeah, it was still
And
better.
there was nothing in between.
It was just land, empty,
Open plains.
open plains.
Yep. Once you get out of Queens, or Queens wasn't Queens, it was still Nassau, I think, back then. But, once you got out of that, it was just open territory, but it took you 3 hours.
And Greenport was really isolated.
Right. Only by boat or stagecoach, basic stagecoach.
Yeah.
And you got your mail a week later.
Weeks or a week later.
You got it, somebody put in mail and you got it a week later or so.
Wow.
Yeah. But Greenport was thriving,
And to switch to your mom's side, did her parents move from Mexico?
No, that's an interesting story.
Oh.
No, her parents never left Mexico. Only my mother was one of four girls. And it's interesting because how she came and the connections that they had and how she came. So my mom came to Greenport in roughly late 40s, okay, 48, 49, somewhere around there. Actually came to stay she was a nanny. She took care of a little guy, and he was little, for a family that was well-to-do, okay, and they actually became publishers and editors of the Suffolk Times, Stuart and Barbara Dorman. And but she had a family, Barbara Dorman had a family, and they lived in Mexico. And my mom was the youngest of four girls, and through their family and her older siblings had kids, and they lived in Texas and somewhere else, Texas in the middle of the country somewhere. And they, when she got married, she had a kid, and they were looking for a nanny. And they had previously, my aunts had worked for her older siblings, taking care of their kids. And so when it came down to my mom, and it's like, well, she was 25, I believe, at the time. But she got asked permission from her mother. Can I go live, take care of their new child, their baby? They're looking for and they lived in Nassau County, in the city also. And they had relatives that lived in Orient. I'm not sure how close, same name. I'm thinking they are the same. I don't know the exact connection, Dormans. So she did. And she said, yeah. So she came to Long Island with them. They had a summer home. They had got a summer home in Orient. She came out for the summers a couple times. And the story goes, my mom tells, is that she didn't speak any English. So somehow they knew my grandfather. And they knew he lived on 6th Street and that he spoke Spanish. So, and the Catholic Church is right there at the corner.
St. Agnes.
Yeah, St. Agnes. So they knew my mom was, and all her family were all Catholic. And she was, I'll take you down to the church. You can go to church, and I'll see if Mr. DeJesus, he can help us out conversing and what. Although she did speak Spanish, Mrs. Dorman, I believe, because she had family, and her family lived in Cuernavaca, Mexico. Her grandmother or something like that. So I'm not sure there, but I know that's where they lived. So my dad was in the Army, and he came home one day, and I guess she was there. They saw each other and said hi, and the rest is history. So she met my dad there, and they didn't speak Spanish. My aunts and my father.
your dad?
No. They did not speak Spanish until they left Greenport and moved to the city. My dad stayed in Greenport,
Okay.
okay, with his brother. They stayed in Greenport, but my grandfather insisted that they speak English. And I remember him saying to one of them, don't speak that language that you learned, that you think Spanish, you learned in the city. That's not Spanish. He did not like that, but he would talk to my mom all day long in Spanish. Every day. They did not speak English around me. They spoke Spanish, because that's real Spanish. They understood each other well. But Spanglish is
from what he said was in the city.
You're right.
Huh.
It's like broken Spanish.
Okay.
Okay, so he didn't like that. Which is understandable.
Yeah.
I mean, but if you talk to Italians,
yeah,
Polish people, whatever else, they insisted that you speak English.
Yep.
Right? That's a normal thing. You come to this country, learn English.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're going to do. Although they spoke it in the house.
Yeah.
Whatever, but you're going to become a better person, and you have to speak English to do that.
And I think they would also tell the kids they wouldn't speak. Maybe some of them wouldn't speak Italian or Polish in front of the kids back then.
Right.
Because they're like, oh, we got to learn English. And
you didn't hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's my grandfather. And I remember him saying that. Don't speak that here, growing up. Because there was really nobody else.
There wasn't too many other
people. I don't think there was any other Spanish-speaking people in Greenport at the time, until that time.
Wow.
I've looked to try and find. There were Italians, which is close.
Well,
but,
would your grandfather say he kind of could understand some of the Italians?
Yeah.
He could.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
They could make it work.
Oh, yeah. He had a very good friend that spoke Italian, Mr. Juvenelli. He lived around the corner. And he says Mr. Juvenelli is the guy who showed him how to make wine.
Oh.
He had a grape arbor. Mr. Juvenelli showed him how to make wine. My grandfather in his house, I think to this day, there are two grape presses, and about used to be at least 6 barrels, that he would put the wine in. When I was a kid, he was like, tell my older sister and I went out to the store and pick up about 3 bags of sugar. And I was like, really? I didn't know that was used in making bootleg wine, whatever you want to call it. So he was arrested for making illegal wine in 1920.
Your grandfather?
Yeah.
In his house?
Yeah, on Fifth Street.
On
Fifth Street. Yeah, he was arrested for the offense. He was charged it was like $20.
He could, but that wasn't allowed?
No, he couldn't do that. That was just the beginning of Prohibition. It was like 20s. No, it was in the 20s. Yeah. And the lady who lived next door was a German lady.
Yeah.
She got busted too.
So everyone was making something.
It was in I have the newspaper article. Yeah. And I asked my dad about it. Whatnot. Yeah.
And that was probably the early days of before all the vineyard stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they were making stuff in their house. And
sure, I always laugh at that.
Yeah.
When these people said, "Hey, this is the first winery on Long Island." Are you kidding me?
There was stuff going on
way before that.
Yeah.
Okay, it just didn't become popular. It just didn't become popular.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all these people. You can't tell me that there were like, I don't know, a few hundred Italian, Polish family that lived in the brickyard, weren't making their own.
Yeah.
Come on.
They
weren't going to the store.
No.
So same with anything else.
Yeah.
Any other peach or whatever fruit you can make, wine out of, or whatever, alcoholic drinks. Let's put it that way,
But back to your mother's side.
Yeah.
Did she say that her parents Were her parents against her coming over here?
No,
They weren't. They said
no.
just go leave.
Well, no, she couldn't just leave.
Not just
She had to actually ask her mother if she could marry my father. My father was not Catholic at the time. And she said, I met a man, and this is what my mother told me. I met a man, he's really nice, and we want to get married. So she had to ask her mother permission to marry, which is like, really? She was already in her late 20s by then.
By the time she was up here.
Yeah.
And
But that's tradition.
yes.
That's in the 50s, early 50s, 1950.
Okay.
So that's tradition.
But what did her parents do back in Mexico?
My grandfather, I don't know. My grandfather was a wanderer. I really don't know. She doesn't remember. He left years before, when she was little. But she grew up in the same house. But out in the country, not in the city, out in the mountains, Tessayuca, out in the mountains, my grandmother raised pigs, hogs. Okay,
At
the house
to sell.
Yeah,
Wow.
Yeah, she raised them. When we were kids, these things were as big as that cabinet.
Huge.
You could ride them.
Yeah.
That's how. I mean, even though we were, they were big. They had big tusks and everything, and they would raise them, and they would kill them to slaughter them on Sunday. So we had to be out of the house on Sunday morning at church. That's when they did it. These things would scream until they hung them in the back. They were big. It was part of the house. It was like a hacienda thing. It was part of the house. They were pens, and they were big ones here from the piglets all the way up to the ones. And then they would butcher it, cut it up. Everything would go out to the open cesspool. That's way back. It was all downhill. And then they would take the meat down to the butcher shop, which was a few blocks away. And then that's where you stored it. He kept up all the locals' meats and stuff. So I remember as a kid going there, and we went around. There's a picture of me. I think I was only 1 year old in the house. But growing up, we used to go every year in the summertime. And, go down and pick up some bacon or something for dinner. And it would be in that brown, thick, manila kind of paper, butcher paper.
Yes.
You don't even see it anymore.
No, not really.
It would be in there. They would take it. This is belonged to Mrs. Jimenez. And, bring it home. Okay. Just tell them it's for, Mrs. Jimenez. But, you bring it home and cook it up and whatnot. So.
But you would go to Mexico.
Oh yeah.
As a kid.
Oh yeah, every year until we graduated high school. That was the last time I went, and that's 70 was the last year I went, and I graduated in 71. So yeah, we would go. My dad would put us on the plane or train. We went by bus.
Really?
Yeah, we took a Trailways bus from New York City.
All the way down to
Laredo, San Antonio.
Laredo.
And then San Antonio, and then we went and took a train from San Antonio, crossed the river, Rio Grande, and then went all the way down to Mexico City. And that's got to be in the mid-60s. So, yeah, it was quite an adventure. It took a couple of 3 or 4 days before we got there.
Well, and then from Mexico City, you had to go out to the village.
Yep, by bus.
Oh.
By bus. That was an experience. When that movie, you see the movie Romancing the Stone, where he who's that famous actor? Romancing the Stone. Anyhow.
I'm not sure.
It's Michael Douglas, I think it was.
Okay.
Okay. Well, in the movie, he's a writer, this and that, and he winds up going to Mexico or down south somewhere. And in there, he's riding a bus, gets in a bus. He has to go somewhere out in the jungle. And the stone, they're in a quest for finding this emerald or something. So I'm watching the movie, and there they are on the bus. It's a really old bus. And the bus has cages of chickens on the roof. These buses, I have pictures of the actual bus that my mom's cousin's family owned, and they were the same thing.
Wow.
And I had to show her that. She was like, "Oh my God." But as a little guy, I would walk down the hill to the bus company. Well, it was their house. They had 2 buses, and get on the bus. And it was like, in the movie, it was the same thing. There was the old-fashioned bus, and the Mexicans and the Spanish people would have Guadalupe. Okay, they're very religious. Yeah, there was a picture. They had flowers. They had these little things all around decorated. And everyone was in the bus. The ladder went up the back. You threw the stuff on top, and there were people inside with their pets and kids screaming. And it was. I was only like 10 years old, but then my mom would tell them, Juan, you make sure you take care of Carlos. Ride the 2-hour ride of the bus to the city, stop in the different places, and then get in the city, and it would drop off. I would go and use the bathroom, whatever, and get a soda, and then I would leave, and then fill up the bus and go back. And I have a picture. Thank God, I have a picture of the bus. And it says on it Tessayuca, this little town that they lived in. Yes. And as I got older, the last time I went with my cousin, I went by myself, and I was big. I was a big guy, 6 foot, just like I am now. Okay, 6 foot, not heavy, skinny, but we would go, and the same family was operating that newer junkie buses. And we would go down and ride our bikes, throw the bikes up top, and then ride down. And that was definitely a different life in Greenport. Very old, very old. And they were part of the Aztec community. Going back, they traced their family back to the Aztecs. Because from where my grandmother's house is, you could see, actually, it was maybe half an hour, 45 minutes away from the pyramids, the Aztec pyramids, Teotihuacan. And you could actually see the volcano. You could see an actual volcano. And the last I heard, a couple of years ago, it was puffing away over there. Like they're like, please don't go up. It's been hundreds and hundreds of years since it was active, but I think in the last 10 years, you see a few little puffs of smoke coming out of the volcano. I don't know that. I know the name of it, but I can't recall the name of it. The volcano. But that was a different world. God, it was a different world. No phones. This is in the 60s, so no phones in the community. The house didn't have a phone. You had to go down to the local store if you wanted to use a phone. Okay, we had running water because there were wells. The well was an old-fashioned well inside the courtyard. And we had bathrooms, the old-fashioned bathrooms with the tank above. The water would fill the tank. You hit it, the water goes down and flush. And it went out to the open sewer. Out in the backyard there, But they did things the old-fashioned way. They made their own tortillas and real Mexican food. Although I wanted hot dogs.
Well, that was when growing up in the U.S. going there, you're like, oh, what is all this?
Yeah.
But do you remember any big things your grandmother made? And did she use a lot of pork?
Yeah, of course.
A lot of pork.
A lot of pork, yeah. Yeah, I don't know if they cooked to keep us happy, but it was basics, really. Eggs, they had chickens, so it was eggs.
Eggs, chickens.
Yeah,
rice.
They had, rice, they had coarse corn. They had, they had a cow. I remember they had a cow, and they had here's a funny story for you. They had a duck.
A duck.
They had a couple of ducks. They used to wander around. So we were really little. And so they were friendly. They just walked around the courtyard, whatever, outside, and came back in, and my sisters got attached to the little guys.
Little ducks.
And so we were eating dinner at the table and whatnot. And one of my sisters, my younger sister, said, "Hey, where's the duck?" She had a name for it, I think. And my cousin said, "Well, what do you think you're eating?" In Spanish. And she was like, "Ah!" She started crying. My aunt went nuts. She was like, oh, she started yelling at him. "What did you tell her that for? Now go get the duck and bring it back here." And she goes, "No, they were wise guys too, So, yeah, so no, we weren't eating it.
Yeah.
But it was, that was, wasn't a farm, but it was definitely, out in the country.
And there was stuff running around.
Oh yeah,
animals.
oh yeah, yeah. The neighbor had. They raised chickens, but they also raised bulls.
Oh.
Big bulls. Bulls that were used in the bullfighting. When we were kids, we could ride. They had horses. They had lots of horses, and we could ride the horses. We got on the horse. The family, they go back years and years and years with my mom's family. And, so we'd go over and they would grab a couple horses and they would tell us what to do. And we were only young teenagers, get on the horse. And one day my older sister and I and one of our friends were riding down the street. They were not paved. They were dirt, hard rock, stone streets. We were riding the horses going along there, not too far from the house, and a rattlesnake came out and scared the horse. And the horse reared up and my sister fell down.
Oh.
She got bruised up, but she didn't, probably more scared than anything else. The rattlesnake took off. We were like, "Oh my God!" That was life in Mexico. I mean, it was. I'm glad.
It was a totally different experience and different environment that you.
Totally different.
Yeah.
Totally different. Totally different environment than here.
Were you there for any holidays?
Yeah.
Celebrations?
Yeah. Oh yes. Yeah. Cinco de Mayo. No. Yeah. There was a lot of occasions where we were there. That the celebrations were different. They were more festive. I would say, and this is the 60s and the late 50s, 60s. They were more festive. When you see films or movies of Mexico and having their singers, the mariachis, and all that stuff. I had a birthday there once. I was like 12 years old, I think, and they dressed me up in one of these with the hat and the whole thing, like a little Mexican cowboy.
Yeah.
It was like, and they had the piñata because the courtyard had four corners open in the inside, so they had the piñata, and you hit it, and it was real. It wasn't none of these. It was made of clay. It was actually a clay pot inside.
Really?
Yeah.
It wasn't all this paper.
Yeah, no, that was on the outside.
That was on the outside, but
but piñatas nowadays are like paper mache.
It's all paper mache. There's no clay pot.
No, there was a clay pot. There was four guys at each corner holding the rope. So when you went to swing, they would pull. And the thing went up like this.
Yeah.
I remember that. And it was, that was different, and funerals. First time I ever saw a Mexican or that kind of funeral. It was like a festive occasion.
It was it wouldn't seem like a funeral, like what you would expect.
Not here, no.
In the U.S.
Right.
There it was almost a celebration of.
Right. It was a different world. I was fortunate enough, and my sisters and I, and whatever, to go back. To have that experience.
Yeah.
Nobody else in Greenport did. I guarantee that. There might have been one or two, not that I know of, but there weren't. It's just when I came back home and went back to school in September, some of my friends were like, "Where the hell were you?" I was at my grandmother's house.
I was in Mexico.
I was in Mexico. I was at my grandmother's house.
Most of the other kids would probably just stayed local.
Yeah. They might have went
to somewhere in the U.S.
Yeah. I tell you what, I don't know. If you did and you were, let me know. I want to hear it. Because here I am, now, and I've known all these people all my life, that I grew up with. I'd love to go back. I really want to go to Puerto Rico to see where my grandfather grew up, but it's on my bucket list. But as far as going to see where my mom grew up and my grandfather, my grandmother, and all those people grew up, that is it was a different world. It unfortunately it's modernized.
When was the last time you went back?
70.
70. So that's definitely.
My sisters have gone back since, even within the last 10 years.
Oh wow!
So they've seen it. I have video and pictures and stuff like that, but it's totally different. The streets are somewhat paved, and it's totally different. It's not what it used to be. It was more just like Greenport.
Yep.
Not what it used to be. But then again, nothing stays the same. It was hot.
Yeah.
That stayed the same.
Still stayed the same.
That was hot. It was real hot.
Did they say that it lost people? That people moved to the city, bigger city?
No, I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I would say people moved there.
Moved there from
the city.
Out of the city.
Yeah. The city, Mexico City, is like I would say is overgrown.
It's a big metropolis.
Yeah. Even was then. I know I have a cousin who lives in the city, and he says even the city's not like it used to be. A lot of people.
Yeah, and we could say the same with New York City too. But now let's get to your dad. And so was he born in Greenport?
All my aunts and uncles were born in Greenport. From his oldest sisters, brothers, down to his youngest.
In Eastern?
Yeah. No, not all born in Eastern. I think the older ones were not born in Eastern Long Island Hospital, per se, but probably at home. But in Greenport, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
And he went to Greenport school?
My dad went to Greenport. They all went to Greenport school.
They all went to Greenport school.
My oldest aunts went to Greenport, and down to the youngest. Well, of course, the youngest went to the new school. There was 12 of them, so that's my father would have graduated in 1938. He's one of the older ones, and by that time, Greenport school was built, and I think it was built in 32. The first graduating class was 33, I think it is, something like that.
The building now.
The building now, right.
But all the other siblings went to the other school.
Right.
Is that by where the
firehouse? Yeah, they all went there.
Did he say how it was at school?
I asked that question because they were a working family. And I got a feeling, I'm talking to some other people, out on the farms, Polish people, they had similar stories. Mm-hmm. You might find this in your speaking to other people, is that the families mostly educated themselves at home. My aunt always said my grandfather was a terrific mathematician with numbers and history. He did. He remembered a lot. He used to tell lots of stories. I used to love to walk across the street. If my mom didn't know where I was across the street talking to him, watching him work. He showed me how to mend nets. But for the most part, they were all, my two older aunts, well, my father's oldest two sisters, were both, I always get this backwards, were both either valedictorian or salutatorian of their class. They graduated. And that's in 36 or 34, somewhere around there. So they were pretty smart. And they had to take Latin.
Yeah, because that was more popular.
Yeah, back then. Yeah, so they were all pretty well educated, but I think my dad used to say that when the season came around, you had to work. You didn't have to go to school. Whereas some other families, I mean, I think farmer families, it's the same thing.
You get to go work.
Yeah, you had to
Was
work on the farm.
in the summer.
And before the summer, after summer too. Yeah, you didn't. That's why they say some families were so big.
Yeah, because that's, you said 12.
12, yeah.
And how big was their house?
Not very big.
Everyone.
But then again, my wife is one of 10, okay?
Yeah.
And their house wasn't very big either. But it's by the time they all didn't grow up at the same time. There's a big span there. So by the time the oldest was old enough to move out and the youngest was still there was some already left. Graduated school.
Some had already gone.
Still there. So yeah, that's the other, where that lifespan, that large year between each one, so they're not all in the house unless you're having triplets and quadruplets.
And then with some of the bigger families, you'd think with the farms, because they would want more. But did he say how it was growing up with all
those siblings?
All those siblings in the house, and was it how was the environment?
Well, see, my dad was my oldest aunt was born in 1916, I think it was, or 17. But Dad was born in 21, so 16, and they were a year apart. There's two that were born within the same year. One was born in January, and one was born in December of the same year. So you have that really close.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't give Grandma much rest.
Yeah.
So he always said they all got along. I kind of feeling that, and I always talk to my aunts and my uncles and whatnot. So they, they bumped heads, but they always said that my father was the more level-headed person. He was the more common sense guy. He was the more common sense guy. The girls went off, got married, and here's a funny story about my father's family. Okay, my dad was born on December 7th, 1921, which became Pearl Harbor Day. That's when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. He was born in 1921, 20 years later. So he was very patriotic even before that. So he enlisted right away, came home. That long story. But anyhow, he enlisted. I think it was by the end of the year, he came home, he signed up, and he actually went in. It was at the beginning of January of 42. So he went on. World War II was over. Came home. He served in the Pacific in the Army. Came home, and his brothers and sisters were here. One of his sisters, after the war was over, went to Washington. There was a program in Greenport, all schools, where the Army and what do you call it, was looking for secretaries or clerical people. And my aunt, one of my father's younger sisters, qualified, along with a couple other ladies or girls in Greenport, to go to Washington and help process and keep records processing the people out of the Army or service. And she did. Well, my father came home and looked around and said, brought, I think, 4 friends with him, that it was in the same troop or company he was. And he said, hey guys, I'm going home. I live in Greenport, and one lived in Brooklyn, one lived in the Bronx, one lived in New Jersey. He said, when you get out, why don't you come out and visit me? And I said, yeah, all right. My father's nickname was Dusty because he worked on the farm. So he was always Dusty as a kid. So they said, sure. So they came out to visit. And my father introduced him to his sisters and his brothers, but his sisters. 3 of them married the 3 guys that were in the same unit he was. My aunt Penny Isla married a guy named Mason. Another one married a guy from New Jersey, Warwick, and another one married a guy from Brooklyn. Now, I mean, he said I think it was like not even 3 months went by. He said, "There's nothing for me here. I'm going back in the Army." And my aunts told me, they said, "You're nuts. What are you doing? What do you mean?" He says, "Why? There's nothing here to do." At the time, the war was over, 46, 45, 46. He went back in the Army. He went back in, served another 3 years. It's actually more than 3 years, but, came back home. Now it's like 48, 49. And he was home for a little while, a couple of months again. He said, "No, I did better in the Army." Went back and re-enlisted again for a third time, and then they wound up finishing in 1951, late 51. So it was like 10 years, and never regretted it. Never regretted it. Came out and became a policeman in Greenport. Now he was like the first minority policeman out here, anywhere. I asked him that question. Was there any other, policeman? He was like, "Not that I know of." He said he did meet one guy. It was way up the island.
Oh, okay.
But out here?
Out here.
No. The newspaper article said Greenport. No, one of the articles said Greenport is looking for people, and then it said there were 2 guys. God, who's the other guy? It was a friend of my father's that they hired at the time. Greenport hired at the time. Carlos DeJesus, colored of Greenport. They didn't think of themselves as colored. Okay, my father.
Your father.
Yeah.
Didn't think of themselves as colored.
Yeah, they didn't think of themselves, even his sisters and so on, as being colored. If you go back to the census, when I started doing the genealogy, the DeJesus family and the Sells family were all MU, listed as a race, MU, mulatto. Okay, and then all of a sudden it become N, and that's unfortunate because of what if you look at my father's. I have a picture. I just saw it. My father's uncle, his father's brother, very fair skinned, but he was from Puerto Rico. He was one of the guys that came, and you would swear they weren't. But even my grandfather was light, So anywho, my father came out, became a policeman in Greenport for a couple of years, more than a couple of years actually, but he didn't stay as a policeman. He took the job it was opening in the post office, I think in 52, 53. And I asked him, I said, "Why did you quit the police department?" He said, "Because we made more money in the post office." I said, "Oh, okay, well that makes sense." He said, "No, that's it." He said it was economics. I'm making more money in the post office than I am as a policeman, and I'm not dealing with all these nuts.
Yeah.
And he called them nuts. He said from time to time that, just these people never learn.
Yeah.
These families just never learn how to behave. And he said, that's aggravating. But he did it. And I just learned not too long ago that he was a special Suffolk County deputy sheriff in the 50s also. And I looked going through some of the stuff and I found a badge. Special Deputy Sheriff, Suffolk County. Policeman's badge. And then I found his ID. With the same thing, same number, same everything, address, his picture, fingerprint. And I said, wow, he never mentioned that.
No, he only said he was for Greenport.
Yeah. I don't know.
Suffolk County.
Yeah, right. But
maybe it was something he couldn't say.
Maybe. I don't know. But that was in the 50s.
Wow.
And I don't know why. I wish I knew why.
But did he ever say what he wanted to do when he was coming out of high school? Because you said he went into the Army after high school, but was
2 years after.
2 years after high school.
Yeah.
But did he say, like, I was going to go do this? Or
no.
He wasn't sure.
No. Well, they all worked with their father on the boats. Okay, they all worked with their father on the boats.
Through high school.
Yeah, through high school. And after that, and my uncles continued to do that into the 60s and 70s.
But did your dad feel like, oh, I don't want to do that?
Although, I don't know, but you know what? He did say one time, we talked about things like that. He did say that, when he was a kid, him and the others would work at the oyster factories, if not on the farm.
Mm.
It's seasonal, so oystering and whatnot is seasonal. So they would work at the oyster factory, and that was it. That was their life. That's all they knew. Was the water, fishing boats, and so on. But once he went in the Army, that was it. In the Army, and then he was a staff sergeant and munitions and stuff over in Australia and Guinea. Oh God, we got pictures of him in all these places, and then he got out when he got in the post office, and they took an accounting course and a mail order accounting course. I remember that. That was something like, what are you doing? And he'd get these things in the mail. He'd read the book, take the test, send it back. So he got I don't know if you call it a degree or whatever from someplace in accounting. But he was a good accounting person in the Army. That's where he really learned. He said he really learned his accounting and numbers is in the Army.
Yeah.
So one of my sons he didn't finish school. And he went over to talk to my father, his grandfather. And he said, I think how it goes is my father said, don't worry, just get your GED. I didn't graduate school. I got my GED after I was in the Army, and he was successful. So you don't have to. I mean, he learned a trade. They all did. My uncle was a carpenter. Both three of my uncles were carpenters. They learned a trade. They worked with their hands.
That was more common.
Yeah. Especially here.
Yes.
Especially here. One of his oldest sisters, when they moved to the city, was a nurse, social worker nurse. Okay, same with the other one. So, yeah, they all did their own kind of thing, which is that's the way it was. But he said, I got it when I was in the Army, and then and he did very well. He did, my father, thank God, he did very well.
Did he describe how was the Army friendly?
No.
No.
No. Did he describe it? Yes.
To him?
I asked him at one time about the Army and stuff. He left. He went here. So he went in 41. The Army was integrated at that time. So he went in, and if you were Spanish, you didn't have to be African American. You either were white or you weren't. If you weren't, you were in the minority group of people. There was no Spanish section or whatever else you want to call it. Okay, so I said, so how was that like? He said, well, we were all the same. Even though I have pictures of him in the service and in the unit that he was in, there were whites in that unit. Okay. But he didn't know no difference. He said, I didn't know any difference. We were all friends. We were all fighting for the same cause. And my uncle used to joke around that way later in years. He used to joke around. He says, yeah, your father, he was always Mr. Nice Guy or whatever else. He was the boss, being staff sergeant. He said, yeah, we were out there working in the munitions area and Australia and whatnot, and he said all of a sudden you hear these planes fly by, dropping, shooting, and your father would stand there and look. I said, really? He goes, yeah, it didn't bother him. I said, really? Get out of here. He goes, yeah, everybody else was like, but that was
everyone else was running for cover.
He was. He said he was, but he didn't show it.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Yeah, he was. He says, yeah, you ain't kidding nobody. But they were friends until he passed. They were close friends. My Uncle Red, my dad. My Uncle Red married his younger sister.
Mm.
They were very good friends, very, very good friends. Even though they were in the same unit and all, they used to talk about it. My uncle talked more about it, my dad did. So, but now come the war is over, and when he went back, now everything was in the segregation. I meant integration, right? Segregation separate. Integration is to everybody's together.
Was the school here integrated?
Yes, everybody was together.
But then when he went to the army, it was integrated by then.
No, when he went in 41. 41 it was.
So it's interesting.
Yeah.
Going to school here and it's already integrated, right. And then for the army, it's not.
It's not. It's not in 41.
So he was
not
probably
until 45 after the war. It is. When he went back, he said the first thing he noticed was like, "Hey, everybody's, we're all together here." He said that was odd. He said, but everybody got along.
They were fighting for the same, and they got along for the most.
Yeah, right. But after the war, he was in different places then. He was in Philippines, different places over there, and then here. He ended up, I think, in, I want to say, I know Fort Devon, Massachusetts. That was his last.
That was because you said he went back and forth into the army.
Right.
Up until, how old was he?
Well, 30.
And then he was done.
Done
with
the military.
Well, what did he say was the worst fighting area experienced during during World War II?
During World War II.
Was it in the Pacific?
Well, I don't think you know. We had accumulated a bunch of books about World War II, but I don't think that one the Pacific, knew what was going on on the Western Front. I don't think they could. You couldn't compare it. He never went there, so you didn't know what life was like there, other than talking to some people. In the Pacific, in the Japanese, in the Pacific were bad. You didn't know when to duck or run, or you said it was quiet for a while.
They played it differently, the way they fought, and
right, because you got to remember. Now he was a munitions. Freighters would come in with ammunition, and that's what their job was to offload it, catalog everything, load it onto trucks, this and that, store it, ship it out to whoever needed it, and then so on. But every now and then, Japan is not far from Australia, right?
Yeah.
In Southeast Asia.
Yeah, okay,
very close. So every now and then, these planes would fly by and start shooting at them because they knew if you cut off the supply, you got them. But then again, they had their own protection. The Americans had their own protection, and stuff. So it wasn't like, it was a totally safe, out of the way place. I did my own research into the place where they lived, where the base was and whatnot, and I contacted some people. It was interesting, like any other American military base. There were a few places of ill repute.
Yeah.
Bars, and they had all kinds of things like that.
Did he like talking about it, or he'd rather say, "I don't really want to"?
No, he didn't say, "I really didn't want." We talked about it.
It's not like, because I can see some, if you talk to some World War II veterans,
right?
Like
even Vietnam veterans.
Even Vietnam, yeah.
Yeah. No.
But he seemed comfortable.
Yeah, my uncles did. The people he was in, the units that were in, that married his sister, they did. As far as, to me, they did. I don't know what they did with their sons. They all had sons, but and daughters. But to me, Uncle Red, sure. My Uncle Blair, Piggery, they did. I mean, when they got together, it was all home. They went through a lot together as young men during the war. for 3 years. That's a
Wow.
lot, but they did, when they all got together. When I asked my grandfather one time, I didn't ask him, but we were talking about it.
Mhm.
And I said, so yeah, Red's coming out, and I don't know why you brought those people here. It was kind of like crazy, but he just asked his friends to come out and visit.
To like reminisce.
No, in Greenport, after he got out of the service, and then they married his sisters. So my grandfather
grandfather's like, why did he bring these,
why
these
did you bring
guys?
those guys here? Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of like, it was one in particular he wasn't fond of. But then again, they moved away. They all moved away shortly after. They moved away shortly after. They went their own Brooklyn, Jersey, Bronx, and so on.
So after he was finished with the army, you said that he was looking around for jobs in Greenport?
I don't know if he was looking.
Mm-hmm.
The village was looking for people, or policemen. And I don't know exactly how he stumbled into that, but he did. And they said, local guy, Greenport, the lifelong resident, just got out of the army and so on. It was in a newspaper article and so on. So he did it, and then again, you got to remember, he's
30.
20, 31, I think. So, it was like, okay, they knew the family. Everybody that hired him, everybody that was in the village knew him. It's not like he was a stranger. He went to school here. He worked everywhere, did everything. So it was and I will say he was probably a too honest of a guy. Too honest of a guy. No, he was good. And he was friends with everybody else that was on the force. I mean, everybody that was on the force.
They're probably like, all right, you want to come on?
You knew him.
Yeah.
Knew him or knew of his family. They all knew. Every one of those names that when he went on the force, everybody were longtime friends of the family or even close schoolmates. And one of them was Donald Miller, Lucky Miller, and he grew up, I think, down the street in the same neighborhood. But so it was not like it was coming into a bunch of strangers and so on. You know what I mean? The Goldsmiths, the Naucklands, all those people knew. They were all local families and accepted it. And he liked the job.
He started out as just
a patrolman.
A patrolman.
Yeah, patrolman.
What year was that?
51. Right after he got out.
Right after
he got out. 51. Yeah.
And he did that for how long?
He did that for a couple of years, full time and part time. But he remained, because I did find some articles where it mentioned him and a couple others arresting somebody. So in like 54 or 55, so somewhere around there. Oh no, it had to be around 55, 56 because he still had his service revolver and stuff in the house when we moved in at 55. So yeah, my mom used to hate that.
That he had the gun in the house.
Yeah. She told me that not too long ago.
Oh.
Yeah, she told me not too long ago. Somebody would come over and say, "Oh, we got to pick up Dusty's gun. He's got to get it clean, serviced or whatever else. You know where it is?" He says, "Yeah, it's in the closet on the top shelf." Okay. She said that she didn't like it.
Yeah.
Having the guns in the house, but she knew.
Yeah.
That was all part of the job.
And did he have any interesting stories while on the?
Did he? Yeah.
I mean,
yes, he did. He did. I mean, I won't say that.
You don't have to go into.
He didn't tell me, but because I've done this research and reading papers. He used to say, like I said before, he got out because the post office paid more, and it was just the people were just.
He didn't have to deal with
Yeah,
people
doing the same stupid,
crap.
So Joe Smith, well, that's not his real name, but Joe Smith could not get his kid to behave, even though he's an adult. What's wrong with you? You got arrested, you got in trouble.
Why do I got to keep coming over?
Yeah, why do I got to keep? Most of it was family matters. And I've talked to policemen that say that's the worst.
The family matters.
Yeah.
Altercations.
Yeah.
Not just general stuff.
Some dumb drunken driver or whatever. When you have to go to somebody's house and they're having a family squabble between whatever, that's not
the
easy.
Worst.
Yeah. And then we had plenty of those in Greenport. So. But no, he did. There was a couple of things I read where it was with another guy, another patrolman. They arrested a guy who was he was escaped from some kind of loony bin. And he came to Greenport, was causing all kinds of heck. But they got him. They apprehended him and so on, and he was sent back to Riverhead to jail and so on and so forth. He did apprehend, or he didn't apprehend. He did arrest one person that I probably would not have thought he did. Okay, let's put it that way. Okay, and after I saw it, I showed my wife, and she goes, "Well, that makes sense." So it was a relative of someone I know.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So, but then again, it is what it is. People just don't learn,
And he was just doing
his job. And this person was a lot younger than him. He should have grown up. But he didn't. But, and then again, he was a tough guy. He was a bayman. He was a tough guy. But that's the way it is. But he loved the post office. Oh, the post office.
That was like a totally different environment.
Oh yeah, the post office was his life.
But when he was still on the police force, what building was that in? Because they didn't work out of the jail.
No.
That was just where they brought people.
Yeah. No. There was two different places. I think one of them was when he was in the 50s was probably the municipal building where the Ireland House is now. There's a picture of a group of guys there, and then after that, because they tore that building down in 55. So, but after that, or prior to that, there's a picture of him. I have two pictures of him with a group picture in front of the village hall that was on South Street. So that was probably it there.
Yeah.
That's probably where then later on it was located behind where the wine store is, used to be Claudio's liquor store. Between that and Arcade, there was a little door there. And that was actually the bus depot office. But it was a police station for a short period of time. And then it was down by Lucharitos, down over in that area. There's one of those little buildings there next to that. That was the police department. But that was going back, that's getting up into the 60s or 70s. And
when did he start at the post office?
I want to say 53. Somewhere around I just found a paper that says he served. It was a proclamation or something, from the government thanking you for his service in the post office. And it said 34 years. But I don't know. I don't get the 34 years, but it's an official paper, so I'm not going to argue with it. But that's, and that was in the 80s. That's when he stopped, early 80s, so, but I think they include, because I know he had told me this, that because when you're in the Army, you work for the government. And up to a certain point, the post office was operated by the government.
The USPS,
right?
It's still operated kind of from.
It's not. I just read an article about that. It's not wholly operated by the government. I think it's controlled by the government. Okay, but yeah. He did an interview with who was it? He did an interview about the post office and when he became postmaster, and that was in 70, I think it was, or 71.
So after 20 years,
yeah, he did.
he became the
That was
postmaster.
where the postmaster before him, Carl Cooper, retired. He became postmaster maybe 2 months later until he retired. And then I don't know who it was after that. So yeah, so he did interviews and describing, when he started as a letter carrier and how the mail came, and then when the zip code came. And I remember as a kid riding a little guy, riding in the back of the mail truck, going down to the railroad station, picking up the mail. He would drive the truck
from the railroad
from the railroad car. All right, he would go down. The mail would come in by train.
Wow.
By bags, and he would drive the truck down, and they would throw the mail bags out on the platform. Just not the platform you see now, okay. And then you would throw them in the back of the truck and drive down to the post office. Not the post office that we know of now that was built in '60. It was the post office that was down the alleyway.
Where
Olive Garden,
the olive
yeah,
branch.
and there's like a steps that go like this.
Yeah,
again.
right at the back.
Right.
That was the post office.
Right.
Before they built that other one in the '60s.
Yeah, 60 or 61. Yeah, before they built that.
So he was there when they moved.
Yeah.
To the new.
Yeah.
And how did it come that he became the postmaster for?
I think that they pull within. You know what I mean? They take from within your.
After you've been there.
Yeah.
A while, but.
Yeah. I think it was assistant at first, postmaster, and then I remember that. And then when Mr. Cooper retired, it was very shortly after that he became postmaster.
Did he say what he liked most about
being a working in the post office?
Post office, people. Being the postmaster.
Well, I don't know about postmaster,
but post office.
But working in the post office was people, meeting people, talking to people. Yeah. Whether you were a carrier or people coming in, and God knows, I've had people much older than me when he was there saying, it was such a pleasure going in and talking to him. He took his job seriously, postmaster and stuff. So he was a really active guy in the post office. I asked him about being a minority person working in the post office. I said, "Dude, was there any other?" And he said, "No, not when I started. Obviously, not when I started. But there was another guy. There was a guy from the Shinnecock Reservation that worked in the post office. And was a good friend of his.
In the Greenport?
No. He worked in Riverhead, and he was good friends of his. And his name, I think his last name was Bunn. And that family goes back way back in the Shinnecock. But he said he was a good friend of his that worked in the post office. And it's funny because this guy's son, I'm pretty sure his son. I went to get a car quite a few years ago at the car dealer in Riverhead. And when he saw my name, and he said right away, he said, "My dad used to work in the post office, and he always talked about a guy from Greenport with
your last name,
your name, Carlos,
and
your name." He says, "Are you related to that guy?" I said, "What's your name?" And I looked at his thing before I could. He said, "Yeah, that my dad and your father were very close friends." And he was like, because this guy was probably, my age, pretty close to it. The salesman at the Ford dealer there. Yeah, it was funny, He said that. I know my father, when we talked about other minorities working in different places, but that was it, a long time ago.
Yeah,
a long time ago that they were. It's the, I don't know. He was always a community person.
Like a lot of everyone, like most of the community knew who he was.
Oh yeah. Most all the community in Greenport. Well, if my ancestors came in 1842, say, which is only about a year off, if I'm off, Greenport was only incorporated in 1838. Okay, so there was still whaling going on, and that house is still there. So even going back then, in the Sells family, before the DeJesus came into it in 1916. they all knew the Sells family. Everybody knew them. They were all involved with some Greenport doing this or that, whether it was in the church or schools or sports, music, entertainment. They all knew. They all knew each other. They were very, very, I would say, crucial, not crucial, but a very, involved part of the community.
And made an impact
Yeah.
in the community too.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, they were, they worked hard. They were hard work. They were, Sells was a truckman. He excavated the back portion of the Methodist church with his horse and excavator. Okay, now that's going back a long time ago.
Yeah.
He did it. He also lost a team of horses in Silver Lake when he was trying to pull out a sled of ice. So they gave way and the horses fell in. They got the stuff out and he got out, but they lost the team of horses in the lake. That's going back in the 1800s. So they were involved in all kinds of things. Carpenters. And going along with Aunt Mary and her family, the other part of, there was another part of my family that married into Ira Moses and Mariah, one of their kids, was a guy named Charles Decatur Williams. He married my grandmother's older sister, my great-grandmother's older sister, Cora Williams. Her father was Charles Decatur Williams. He was a barber in Greenport from 1844 until 1906 when he died. And he had a barber shop right across from the movie theater. Well, the movie theater wasn't there then, but right across from the movie theater, there's one building there. That was his building. It's on the 1858 map, on the 1873 map, and so on. Charles Decatur Williams. He came, all I know is he came from the West Indies. Came from New York. And in his obituary, which was a long one, he came from the West Indies, moved to New York when he was a young man. It just says he was born in 1820 and then came out to Greenport and then settled and married into the Sells family. And then they became another integral part of the village, the Williams family, Charles Williams. And they lived on there at that building because everybody lived above their business. But it's funny, if you look at, I have a picture of her, Cora Williams. She looks like an Indian, long hair, pretty much straight, or slightly wavy hair, long. And her face looks like, if you ask somebody, and I'll show you someday, you look at her, you'll say she was a Native American, and that's who she was, And then she lived there, and she carried on the business after he died, of a laundry business, catering to the yachts, the sheets and all the fine linens and whatnot. That was her advertisement. And then the other part, the Aunt Mary married the Hannibal part of the family are Masons. So they all knew each other.
Because it was still a somewhat smaller community that people would know each other.
But then again, it was, but it wasn't. If you look at the census, census from the early 1900s, back in the shipbuilding, there were 3,000 people living here. That's more than that live here now.
Yeah.
So it wasn't it was a thriving place, but then again, I think even going back in the 1800s, late 1800s, it was like 1,700 to 2,000 people. It was a bustling little place.
People coming and going.
Settling, living, and then all of a sudden, hey, I like it here.
Yeah.
I think I'll stay here. And they stayed here. People forget that. I ask people, well, where'd your family come from? Well, I don't know. They were in Greenport here, and my grandfather worked here, but they had to come here from somewhere else. Very, very few people are descendants of original settlers. Very few. One just passed away, a friend of mine. But
most of them came here
from somewhere else. Most of them did. The Youngs, the Corwins, the Conklins, all these English families. There's a handful that can trace their roots back to the original settlers of Southall. Hortons, a bunch of them. Very few, really. And I think some don't even know.
They don't even know that they're
Right.
related.
They don't know that they can go back that far.
And what was your mom doing?
My mom was a housekeeper. Yeah.
Because you said she started out as a nanny.
Right.
And then she met your father.
Right.
And
she was still taking care of this little guy. Okay. She was still taking care of him. And then, once he grew up and went off to school, then she became a housekeeper, for her own self, but also for others, and then she started working in restaurants. She worked at Mitchell's. She didn't work at Claudia's. She worked at Mitchell's, and other places. Yeah, she was always a busy person.
And how many kids did she have?
There's 4 of us.
They also had to maintain the family and
at
the same time.
At the same time, yeah. But then again, my dad, like I said, when I was one of my younger sisters was born in Mexico, and so she was there when she had her, and so we went down there. I know there's pictures of me in 55 or 54. I was only a year or 2 old, so we used to go quite often during the summer. It had to be expensive. I don't know how expensive, and they have. We were finding papers that even tickets, airline tickets, stubs of when we went. Like, they didn't throw anything away. Thank God. But they didn't. My mom kept all kinds of papers and stuff. So,
but
they never. My grandfather went back to Puerto Rico once or twice. I think 1907, probably to visit family.
Yeah,
and that was as far as I know. But out of his family, only my father's family, because the others came and never went back. I don't believe my father's aunt Teresa and Florentino. They did not. And actually, they grew up in Peconic and stayed in Peconic for quite a while before one of them Florentino moved to Greenport. But he had another brother who was a younger brother who was a little Patricio. He was a little he liked to party too much. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Looking for a nice word. But yeah, he got in trouble here and there. But he didn't stay here long either. I believe he went back and stayed. But then he had other siblings that never left Puerto Rico. And it's kind of, I don't know why. I'll never know why. But they didn't. Only my grandfather, my father's father, his older sister and brother were really the ones that actually came to the United States and settled. Now, my grandfather did not serve in the Army. He did work at Camp Upton.
Was this for World War One?
World War One, yeah. My grandfather did work at Camp Upton along with another guy who used to live in the neighborhood. Named it was either Carlazzi or Carosa. I think it was Carlazzi. And I remember meeting him. He lived in Greenport for quite a while. But back in the early 70s, I bought a Harley Davidson motorcycle. And when I brought it home, I wasn't living at home, but when I brought it home on 6th Street, my grandfather saw it. He saw me on it. And he came running over. He said, "Come, I gotta see this thing." He knew right away what it was. He had, I think he said 2 or 3, way back in the early 1900s. Motorcycles. He said they used to ride them from Greenport to Camp Upton to work. Dirt roads, old-fashioned, headlights were, really big, not very well lit, and stuff. They would ride up there and work. He didn't go into. I've never, but his older brother did. He served in World War One. His older brother did serve in World War One. Came from Puerto Rico. He served, and he got his naturalization papers when he got out. of the Army, and he served over in Europe. So yeah, he did, but not my grandfather did, but he worked there. And I think there was a
Okay.
lot of people that did. I mean, that was a huge place.
That worked at Camp Upton.
Camp Upton, yeah,
Mm.
yeah, that was a huge place.
And then can you remember any traditions that might have been passed down from your grandparents on both sides, or and that you might have seen from your parents that they continued to do, whether it was some holiday, some other traditional things that might have been passed down?
I don't. I know. I mean, the only traditional things I know about my mother's side was that we always went in the summertime to visit my grandmother. That was a necessity, I think, on my mother's side. And my father went too. He used to go when we were little.
Mm.
He would go with us. As we got older, he spent more time at work in the post office and stuff. So he didn't go in the later as we got older. In the late 60s, I think the latest he went. I know he went after he retired, I believe, with my mom and stuff, but he was quite older then. But as a young adult with kids, he didn't go over, when we were teenagers and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But that was we knew it. School was getting over.
You were going to go.
We were going to Mexico. As far as my grandfather and grandmother, like I said, my grandmother passed away when I was really young, so I don't know of any other than family gatherings,
Mm-hmm.
small family gatherings. They didn't have big family gatherings, as far as I know. They might have. I know through reading papers and stories about the Sells' earlier times in coming to Greenport from Nisqually and so on. Yeah, they used to come visit quite a bit.
Okay.
Okay, because there were still Sells living in that part before, and then as they got older and whatnot. My dad says as a youth, a young kid, they would come out and visit grandma and her
Mm-hmm.
people, when she was, and when he was in his maybe teens or whatever. So that had to be in the 30s, early 30s. They would come out, on holidays and so visit relatives and stuff like that. Other than that, I don't.
Not really any. Like you probably have those traditional holiday meals.
Yeah, we did it at our house.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did it at our house. We always got together. My sisters, no matter where we were, we'd come out and spend time, but not as a young family. I don't remember that. We did more of that now. And my wife's family did more of that.
Kind of bringing some of that stuff back.
And we still do it at our house. I mean, with her siblings and their children and now great-grandchildren,
Yeah.
at our house because we have a big house. So, but even that's kind of, as kids get older, they have their own families and move away.
Mm-hmm.
It's tougher
Yeah.
to come out and visit. But I remember, God, in the 80s, in 90s, whatever, at the house, that place was packed. Little kids running around, lots. It wasn't quite as, even the last few years, hasn't been as, we had a lot of people at the house, but
not as big as in the past.
No, not as big as the past, No. They try to have more reunions, family reunions. On my wife's side of the family, they do every summer in Calverton, so they at least try to get together, so on. So, but as far as my family goes, not so much. Not so much.
So how was it like for you as a kid growing up in Greenport? How did you see the area as a kid outside of school?
Outside of school? Well, I grew up in 6th Street, okay?
Yeah.
I grew up on 6th Street just south of the tracks. My parents, after they got married, lived on the corner of 5th Street on the east side, right next to the tracks. From 53 to 55, where my father built a house on 6th Street. Across the street from where he grew up
part of his youth growing up on 6th Street where my grandfather lived. So that neighborhood was, full of kids. Most of us, I won't say most of us, I can't say for sure, but the Catholic school was in progress then.
St. Agnes.
St. Agnes.
Catholic
Okay,
school.
so my mom being very Catholic, my dad also, he got changed over to Catholicism. He became a very devout Catholic. Okay, so he devoted a lot of his time to the church and other things. But there were a lot of us in that neighborhood, a lot of kids, boys and girls, and we walked to school. We walked to St. Agnes, snow, rain, whatever else. So we all played in people's yards. Our yard, we had a big yard, and we all played together. There were all kinds of people, played together. And so it was a close-knit community of guys my age and younger. I have two younger sisters and an older sister. So everybody had their birthdays at different houses and so on and stuff like that. So it was a good growing up.
You could explore and not.
Oh yeah. We played outside at night, flashlight tag or run around. We actually, played kickball in the street. Nobody bothered you. We played kickball, hide and seek, and so on. We played all these games. If we could play. There was a couple families down the street that had really big yards. They're not big anymore, but we could actually play football. We could play baseball or softball, baseball at the Catholic church because they had a big parking lot and they had a big area there behind the church, and that was our playground. They had a basketball hoops on both sides. I wasn't a very good basketball player, although I was one of the taller kids in the community. I still was not a good basketball player. Clumsy me. I tried out, but I always fouled.
At the school?
At the school. Yeah, there was CYO, Catholic Youth Organization. So the Catholic school had a team, and and then going on to high school, because I went to Catholic school to 8th grade.
So you didn't go to the Greenport school?
Not until 9th grade.
Oh.
I went in 9th grade. And then most of us did. Most of us went to school until 9th grade, Catholic school until 8th grade, at that point. And then we went to...
How big was your... You said till 8th grade?
Right. 8th grade we graduated Catholic school.
And how many people kind of came out of there?
Well, I think in my class there was probably about 20. I want to say maybe give or take some.
And then they would go into the main school.
Then they would go to the public school,
Yeah.
Greenport High School in 9th grade. There were a handful of people in the Catholic school that were from Shelter Island. There was like maybe 2 kids or 3 in my class that were, and they're just about every class, I guess, that were from Shelter Island that went to Catholic school in Greenport.
Because there wasn't one on Shelter Island.
No, there wasn't none. There was a high school there.
Yeah.
And elementary school there, I believe, yeah. So then they went. And then there was a couple of kids, I guess their parents wanted them to continue going to a Catholic high school. So they were sent to Mercy High School in Riverhead.
Oh.
Okay, so...
What was that one in Cutchogue, Sacred Heart?
Sacred Heart.
Did that only go up till...
I think it went to 6th.
6th grade? Oh,
I'm not positive, but yeah.
Yeah, that was the only other one.
Yeah, that was the only other one.
Till you get to Riverhead.
Yep. Mercy High School was the big one. Mercy was big.
But you didn't, but your parents were like, they're fine. They were fine with you going
to
public school at
Greenport High School, yeah.
Greenport High School.
The public high school. Yeah, they were fine.
How was that transition over there?
It was weird. To me, it was odd because we wore uniforms.
Oh,
we wore uniforms. I have pictures. I have pictures of us every day. We had a uniform. We had pants, white shirt, red jackets, bow ties, or red bow tie or blue bow tie. The girls had skirts, shirts. They were Catholic school uniforms. So then we went to Greenport school. Although at that time you couldn't wear jeans. This is in like 66, 67, 68.
Did they wear khaki
No,
pants? No.
no, you had to wear regular pants.
Oh.
You know, you couldn't wear sneakers. You know, not until after I graduated did you see some people start to wear jeans and sneakers. And, oh no, you couldn't come to school in a T-shirt.
Yeah.
You know, guys, girls especially, still had to wear skirts and stuff. You know, it was kind of a that dress code faded away after the someone told me after the 69 the
Into the 70s, it got more lax.
yeah actually probably in 70
70.
68 70 somewhere around there 69 when Woodstock happened.
Oh.
Then you had the flower power and you know and all that kind of stuff. You know, guys. Actually, I didn't go to Woodstock. I was only that would happened in '69, so I was only 16 years old.
But you heard about it?
Oh yeah. Everybody heard about Woodstock. Like, oh my God, Woodstock. You know, yeah. And I had friends. I had a couple guys that I know of that went. You know,
Yeah.
there were other people that were older than me, and you know, had already graduated. They went to Woodstock. You know, but nah, I wasn't going there. I remember growing up and we had transistor radios. God, if you had a transistor radio in the 60s, you were special. You know, you know, you could.
Yeah.
We bought the W.T. Grant opened up their big store in Greenport, and I think it was 60 or 62.
What type of store was that?
It was a department store, kind of like Woolworth or
Yeah.
you know something like that. W.T. Grant. It took up a whole where you see now. What is it called? There's like a Mexican restaurant and
Oh, Tikal and
yeah.
place.
That building. That building
used to be a department.
Yeah, that was a department store. W.T. Grant. So you could then records started coming, the 45s. They had LPs, you know, so albums, you know, when the Beatles came, I'll never forget my older sister got a Beatles record in the old-fashioned record player with they were like boxy things, you know.
Yeah.
And my sister was playing the Beatles record and my father was like, don't play that here. Turn that stuff off, you know. It's like he's like.
What's he thinking? Like, what is this new?
Yeah.
Music.
Yeah, sure. I think a lot of parents were.
Yeah.
You know, like, oh my God, these guys with long hair.
The British invasion.
Yeah.
They swept the U.S.
They were going nuts, you know. And the transistor radio actually only could get AM. There was no FM.
There was no FM.
No, that came a little later, I think. Yeah, back in the early 60s, mid-60s.
Was that something you would listen to in high school?
Yeah. Well, no, you couldn't bring them to school.
But like back at home?
Yeah. You back at home, you know.
Did you have a TV?
We had a TV. We were we had a television. It was black and white, kind of wooden boxy thing, not a really big screen. If you heard of somebody who had a color TV, they were like the elite. They were like, wow, they got a color TV, you know. And it was kind of like but we had a regular old RCA, you know, whatever it was, you know, television, you know, and you only got 6 channels, 2, 3, 4, up to 13, and that was it. And they were mostly, I think 8 or 7 were the New York channels, but the rest of them were all Connecticut. And you had to have the antenna on the roof. You had to have
get that.
To get that, yeah. Or the rabbit ears. So
Yeah.
we fought over like, no, I want to watch this. And it was only like 6 channels. No, you're not watching that. And then you were, as kids, you were watching Lawrence Welk. My father loved boxing.
A few people have mentioned Lawrence Welk.
Lawrence Welk, oh yeah, on Sunday, sure, you know. And then Saturday night was boxing. My dad loved boxing. I would sit there and we would watch the boxing on TV, you know. That was pretty cool. But it was, they weren't.
Were there any TV shows that would show on
I don't remember.
No.
I'm sure there were.
Yeah.
I'm sure there were TV shows that were popular, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, the rest of us were just, you know, even, you know, we were out playing.
Did you? What else did you do outside? Did you go fishing?
I did.
You did.
I did. I did. I did. My grandfather was a fisherman, commercial fisherman,
Mm-hmm.
for years and years and years. And as I got to be like about 12 or 13 or 14, I would go out with my uncles. And a fishing boat was like 30 something foot long.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they would go out net fishing, not fishing with the pole.
Yeah.
They had nets, and they would send out nets, haul seining it's called, and then or scalloping during the scallop season.
Yeah.
You know, we would go out, and then as I got a little older, a couple of my friends, you know, my grandfather had a scallop shop where he had his nets and stuff in the back, and you know, we would catch our own. He would supply us with, you know, tools to do it, and then we would come back, bring our catch back, open it, and he would tell the openers, "This is my grandson," you know, and his friend Jeff, don't, you know, leave them alone. That's what they caught today on their own.
Mm.
And then he'd measure up after we opened them. He'd put them in a container and measure and pay us.
Mm.
You know, that was probably my first paying job.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but there were a lot of people, a lot of families that did that around. You know, a lot of my friends and their fathers, whatever, would go out doing that. We had my dad bought a boat, you know, with an outboard motor. It was more of a pleasure boat, but we would go
Mm-hmm.
out, you know, with our poles and our bait and whatever, and try to catch whatever we could out in the bay.
Mm.
You know, that was always fun. A lot of kids did that. Come out and, you know, then so it was fun. And skiing, water skiing, did a lot of water skiing, jumping off the dock. You know, swimming was I never heard of a pool.
Mm-hmm.
You know, swimming pool in your backyard. Now there's every other house.
Back then, there weren't. People didn't need it. I mean,
You don't need it now.
you
could
don't
just
need it
jump-
now
you,
either.
you could just go down
You're
the edge.
surrounded by the water.
Yeah, you just go down and you jump in. You know,
Mm-hmm.
my older cousin Tony. I'll never forget when he maybe was traumatized, but didn't. My older sister and I, he took us down the end of 6th Street because we lived on 6th Street. He took us down the end of 6th Street. You know, we went down there. We would go wading. So he gave us 2 life preservers, one each, took us under, walked us out. I don't think I could touch the bottom,
Mm-hmm.
you know, which really wasn't that far out, you know, and said, "All right, come on back." And we were screaming, holding on to them life preservers, flailing our arms and kicking. And we got
Mhm.
back, touched the ground. We were mad, but that's how we learned to swim.
Mm-hmm.
And we just went back again and again and again, and learned how to, and you know, and we learned how to swim. Run off the
Mhm.
dock, jump off the dock, diving. You know,
Mhm.
and that was a normal activity during the season,
Mm-hmm.
the summer season. You know, it was doing that.
What about the railroad tracks? Would you hang out over there?
Oh, the railroad tracks. You know, my father told me that because way back when I was a kid, when I was like 2 or 3, when we have pictures. My mom took pictures, and they knew because the railroad locomotive stopped running in 1955. So I was like 2 years old. So my mom said that she used to tell us, "Yeah, you know, we knew the schedule of the train. She knew the schedule. Wash the clothes by hand, or however, hang them out on a line. But you had to have the clothes back off the line in the house before the train come, because all the soot from the locomotive would get all over the clothes.
Yeah.
And there was no Pampers.
No.
Everything was diapers. I had 2 younger sisters. They were like a year old. So you know, they had diapers, and you had to get that stuff off the line, or
Mhm.
or the train would what do you call
Well,
it?
that's it would turn all your clothes black.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, don't wipe it.
Yeah.
You just embed it into your clothes and stuff. So,
Hmm.
but you know, the train going by regularly, we would we would go to the tracks, wave to the engineer, the guy running the train, you know, and he waved back, toot the horn, you know. Of course, we had to put pennies on the track, something to flatten them out. That was a normal thing, and then try to our extent of what do you call it, balancing beam was who could walk the furthest on the track.
By balancing on.
Yeah, by balancing on the track. If you could walk from 5th Street to 6th Street, luckily maybe you could get that far if you had a good sense of balance. Walk it. That was always a challenge.
Yeah.
But every now and then, a few times after, this is like in the 60s, after the locomotive, they still turned the engines, some of the engines, the diesel engines, on the turntable. So we would come down, walk the tracks. The guy would say, come on, get on the train, get in the cab. He would go back to the turntable, get on the turntable. The guy would hook it up, turn it around. So now the engine was facing west instead of east. You hook it to the other end and then leave town, leave the village. And then he would drop us off and stuff. So it was always a fun thing. The train. We never noticed the noise.
Yeah.
Never noticed the noise. My dad said when he was a kid, the locomotives, they would have coal stoves in the house. They had big chunks of coal in the coal, cars and so on. So his father would say, run down to get a bucket. We need some coal for the stove. So him or his brother or whatever would run down, pick it up, because it would fall off on the ground.
From the locomotive.
Yeah, from the tender, it would fall off on the ground. Huh. And they would just go down. They would go get a bucket.
Go get some coal.
Yep, go get some coal. My grandfather's house had a coal chute in the basement. He had 2 bins. So Riverhead Coal would come with a truck, and the truck would raise up, and the chute would go in the window down by the driveway, and it would go into the coal bin in the basement. And that, I remember many a times sitting in my grandmother and grandfather's kitchen, hot as can be. That stove was hot. It heated the whole house. That was the way they did it. They heated it, heated the stove. But when my father built the house, he had the modern oil furnace instead of the old-fashioned coal stove. But my grandfather kept it for years. Kept it for years and years to keep it going. I learned how to mend net. My grandfather showed me mending nets, and working on it. They had chickens. He had a chicken coops in the back, that scared the daylights out of me. He said, go out, get some chicken, get some eggs, we'll have something. I went out there to the chicken coop, tried to take the chicken off the basket wherever they were sitting and reach in, and actually the hens would peck at you. Yeah. I was like, no, I'm not going out there.
Yeah.
So it was fun.
Yeah.
My grandfather used to, when he was commercial fishing, he had a garden next to his house, and he grew his own corn, grew his own tomatoes, carrots, onions, and then when my father built the house and I got to be 10, 12, we had our own garden. So we grew our own vegetables. Not many people in the neighborhood did, but we were fortunate enough to have a big backyard. And then do that around in the end. So, but it was fun,
Yeah.
It was fun. And then getting to high school was you ever hear people talk about, oh, you're from the other side of the tracks.
Mm-hmm.
I guess every community had that.
Had something like that.
What neighborhood did you live in? Well, I lived on the other side of the tracks.
And then, like, some people could say, "Oh, you were on that side. I never went over there." But
right,
I didn't know people who grew up on that side of the track.
Right. Same thing. And it was, hey, that was our neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still friends with some people. There's 2 people that I grew up with my age. They went to school together all through high school, and what do you call it? That still live. Jeff still lives there. And that still live in the neighborhood. It's great, really. He lives actually across the street from the house he grew up in. But, his sister, I think, lives in his parents' house. They were always great people.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know this until later. My father's family he was one of 12 kids, boys and girls, right? And my wife's family, her mother was one of 6, I think, maybe 6 or 7 of her mother's brothers and sisters. And they lived on the corner. And her grandfather, and they all went to school together. The whole neighborhood. There was kids in the whole neighborhood that their parents even went to school together, which is kind of like unheard of now.
Yeah.
The whole neighborhood, that grew up there. It's funny because I was working in Garden City, and the lady driving the bus, and the lady said to me, "I know that name." She saw my name tag, and she said, "I know that name." She knew the bus company was from Greenport, and she said, "I went to school with a guy his name was Carlos." And I said, "Really?" And she goes, "Yeah, he lived on 6th Street." I said, "That was my dad." She goes, "I grew up on 5th Street." I was like, "Wow, get out of here, really?" Yeah, and they went to school together, to Greenport. It was funny. I never saw her again. But, we talked that day, on the bus going into the city and whatnot. It was funny. Riley was her name. Her last name was Riley. But that was cool. But there were a lot of people like that.
Yeah.
In the neighborhood, that all went to school at one point, and your parents went to school at one point. So not so much anymore.
No.
No. So.
But what about, and then, so how was your overall experience in Greenport High School? Were you involved in?
I was not involved in.
Clubs,
like I said,
or activity.
I wasn't a good sports player. I was telling somebody the other day. They asked me the same kind of question. Were you on the football team? I didn't like baseball, and although my father bought me this glove that only had 4 fingers, that had a thumb and 3 fingers in it. It was the most awkward thing you ever saw.
Mm-hmm.
And but I didn't like baseball. I played on a Little League team once, and that was in '62, I think it was, or '61, and that was the littlest guys. But no, I wasn't a good athlete. Let's put it that way. I ran track, and I did the shot put and the discus 4 years in high school. And I was on the football team in my freshman year and the JV team. And I was the guy, it was a phrase that you were the end guard and tackle. You sat on the end of the bench, you guarded the water bottle, and you tackled anybody who come near it. That was me. That was the extent of me, in my sports football history in Greenport, So, but other than that, not really a lot.
No other clubs or anything.
No.
How were
I wasn't good in Spanish, which is really,
Spanish.
Well, my mom came from Mexico and spoke Spanish in the house. My grandfather came from Puerto Rico, and they spoke Spanish every day.
But it still wasn't.
It wasn't and to add insult to injury, when we were little, 4 or 5 years old, until we graduated high school, we spent summers at my grandmother's house in Mexico. My mother's house in Mexico. So as soon as school got out, or even before,
we would
go and spend July and August and parts of September, the first week in September or so, at my grandmother's house.
Mm-hmm.
Then we'd come back and go to school.
Yeah.
And then after that. So that was my mom wanted to go back and see home. Her sisters, her brother, she didn't have no brothers, her sisters, her cousins, and so on. So we did.
Mm-hmm.
I did speak Spanish, but I couldn't. When I got back home, I just lost it. Mm-hmm. My sisters kept it. They did. To this day, my 2 younger sisters speak fluent Spanish.
Oh, okay.
My older sister and me wasn't happening. I don't know why. And my Spanish teacher was Mr. Campbell. Jack Campbell was my Spanish teacher in high school. He ribbed me to death. Even after I got out of school, he would say he wouldn't say anything in English when he saw me. He would say it in Spanish. And I
And
was
then
like,
you were like,
"What'd you say?" But we joked and joked
Yeah.
about it, you know. Yeah, we joked about it. It was funny, you know, because hey, here's a
What-
guy, you know, who spent summers in Spanish. I played with kids that all they knew was Spanish all summer long
in Mexico.
in Mexico, and then, you know, when I come home, I wasn't doing too good in the Spanish class.
And then how were the other teachers that you had? How were they?
Oh, I was a mischievous person, I think, but I'm not sure if it was
Were they
me.
strict?
No, yes, yeah, they were,
But
you know.
to an extent,
Yeah.
do you think they had to be?
I think the nuns were more strict.
Oh, before high school,
Yeah.
they were more strict.
Oh, yeah. If
Oh.
you ever heard the story about nuns smacking your hands with a ruler or whatnot,
Mhm.
that's true. That
Yeah.
really happened.
Did they ever? I've heard things about washing.
Your mouth out with soap.
Yeah,
I don't remember that, but
but the knuckles.
oh yeah. They had pointers. These little sticks with pointers or rulers. You know, thick rulers. If you were goofing around, they'd come behind you. You know, and you were like, ah. You know, and that was, it wasn't just me, it was other
Other.
people, other classmates. Yeah, they were strict.
Yeah.
They were strict. But we had a couple of priests that were very youth oriented. They played with your sports, you know, they would I can't remember their names, but they did. I'll tell you a funny story though, was you know, nuns were to us were you only saw their face and their hands, right? Because they had a habit, you know, that habit, that black thing with the thing white covered their eyes and their
Yeah.
chin and whatnot, and so you really didn't know what was behind it all. And one day in the summertime, you know, me and a couple of my friends, we were down at end of 6th Street, 5th Street. We went out swimming and this and that, you know, and so this lady walks by and said, "Hey guys." "Oh, hi." You know, we just said hi and went about our business, you know, and we were only kids, you know, maybe 12, something
Mhm.
like that, 10, 12, you know, and she had a bathing suit on. She was swimming and sitting on the beach. So we went to school for something a couple of days later. And she said, "You guys have fun at the beach? I saw you were swimming the other day." Something like that, right? And we were like, "Where were you?" You know, she goes, I said, "How'd you know?" "Well, I was at the beach swimming too." We were like, to this day, I don't remember who it was or which one it was. You know, it was a younger nun, but it was like, oh my God. So they're real under there. They're real people.
Yeah.
They're not just, you know, nuns or whatever. And they were Sisters of Mercy. They came from, I think, the Carolinas or something like that.
Oh.
Sisters of Mercy. They were the teachers, and then they had lay teachers too, women, not men. They had lay teachers also. And then, you know where the Bartlett House is? Well, it was the Bartlett House. Now it's called Tapestry.
Oh yeah.
Okay, that big house on the corner. It was called the Bartlett House because that was the guy who built it in 1905, I think it was. Well, when I was growing up, going to Catholic school, that was the nuns' convent. So the nuns lived there, a bunch of them, right? I spent a lot of time after school in detention at the kitchen table doing my homework in that building. You know, it was like, "Where's Carlos?" Well, he had to stay after school
For detention.
for detention to do his homework. He didn't turn in his paper or something. So that's where I was.
Mhm.
I was over there. I'd get home and, you know, like my dad would come home from the post office or my mom. I was like, you know, he was in detention today. "Why you didn't do your homework?" And I'd catch hell for that, you know. But a lot of people did. Now, I wasn't the only one.
Yeah.
But then again, I was a little mischievous, so, you know. But yeah, and the other guys, and there was a couple other crazy things at the Catholic school, you know. That's the first time I ever saw Cablevision. We ever saw Cablevision.
Mm.
It was I think it was in the early 60s. The new building was built 60 or 62. The hall was there with the stages. And so a lot of pictures, graduating pictures and stuff were done in what looked like an older building that faced closer to the street. That's the hall. There was a classroom. There were room dividers in there. And I remember, they just built the big tower down here at the end of Webb Street, Cablevision, or whatever it was called at the time. And they wheeled out, all right, everybody, come on out. They took the whole class, the whole building, into the auditorium. They brought out this TV with a big wire to the back of it. And that's where we did anyhow, first saw cable TV.
Mm-hmm.
You saw channels that you never saw before, only educational channels. So we weren't watching, and the news,
Yeah.
and the news and stuff like that. And I think we did see when Kennedy was shot in 63,
63, I think.
63. Yeah, I think they did show that, on the news. That was big. I think I was in 5th grade.
And you remember that?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. It happened, and it was like all of a sudden everybody's like quiet. Nothing was happening, and all of a sudden then someone had said the president was shot, and then they sent us home after that. But yeah, those little things are funny.
And then in high school, did you have a favorite subject that you liked? Did you like history then?
No.
You're like,
No, history was not at the top of my list. Neither was English. Science was. Science was a joke.
what about math?
No, math wasn't
No.
either.
But science kind of...
Science was cool. Science was cool.
Yeah.
Science was good. Auto shop, wood shop. Now they call it tech.
Yeah.
But I had a guy named Mr. Finkel. He was the best. And Mr. Finkel, but the science teacher we had when I was in school was Mr. Jansen. Tall guy, tall bald-headed guy. And he was always doing something creative, let's put it that way. But then again, me and a couple of my classmates, or some of them, were, we kind of like took it too far. And he would get mad. And all of a sudden, he'd be screaming at you and screaming at somebody running down the hallway and, like, get back here, you're supposed to do this or do that, and yeah, it was kind of we kept them on their toes.
Yeah.
And then we had some nice teachers, but this was like in the late I graduated in 71. So 71 was a handful. We had some teachers that were a little bit too free. I'll say free.
Mm-hmm.
They were a little too progressive. Let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean that in a bad way or any other way, but as time goes on, like I said, you couldn't wear sneakers, this or that. Sports was sports, and then you had some teachers that were a little bit, they were new. They were from the 60s in the, that era. Graduated in 64, 65 from school. Went to college, come out in 68. Started teaching. So they're like in the new era of music, rock and roll, and so on. So they were a little bit more progressive than the older teachers were. I don't think they weren't.
They didn't hit it off.
The old teachers, Mr. Wells was a science teacher. Mr. Wells, Mr. Manwaring, Mr. McDonald, he was a history teacher. And some of these, I may be wrong, but some of these guys were old school. They were old school. And then now the new regime came in, and they were just exactly that. They were from a new era, not the old school era. Someone told me at a time that this happened in the late 60s because they were baby boomers. They were born in the 40s, mid to late 40s. Okay, so they were born then. And then they grew up after the war. And so the teachers that were there, they were retiring because they already put in their 20-something, 30 years, whatever. Now I know a whole new group of kids that were probably their juniors. You know what I mean? Their parents were teachers. Now they came in, but in a different era. And so it's kind of like, but they, I liked them. They were good,
It wasn't like a dramatic change in the way they taught, or
there was
somewhat.
I think there was. Yeah, I think there was.
Yeah,
but
or I don't even know whether it's the way they taught you or the way they discipline you, or
I don't think there was discipline.
And there's no discipline.
There was discipline, but not the way the old school teachers did.
Not the way probably done in the 40s and 50s, 30s, 40s.
Right. Yeah, no.
But, and then did you know, in high school, did you know what you wanted to do coming out?
I did. I did know what I wanted to do. I did. I wanted to be a mechanic. I loved working on motors. And
any like cars, motorcycles?
Cars. Well, one of the reasons was next to my parents' house was a junkyard. It was
that was just I think that was a car, or it was just a regular junkyard.
A car.
Because some people said, oh yeah, they would go hang out in there and just.
Well, next to where between where my parents' house and the village highway department, there was a whole bunch of old cars in there. Benjamin Brothers, that was their last name. They had junk cars and trucks, and in the building they had parts all over the place. So me and a couple of other guys every now and then would sneak around and go in there and take rocks and break the windows and stuff. Then they would chase us out. But the Benjamin Brothers had a junkyard, so there was a lot of old cars. But I loved old cars. I loved working on motors, lawnmowers, you name it. We built our own motorbikes, with the 3 horsepower Briggs and Stratton motors and different things like that. So I did. So I took shop all year, all 4 years at school that I could, auto shop with Mr. Finkel, and then I took metal shop, welding, and so on, and then I only took, I think I took once wood shop, but the rest of it was basically mechanical. And I loved working on motors and stuff. I had my own tools. So after school, I went to Denver Automotive and Diesel School for 6 months, I think it was.
Where was that?
Denver Automotive and Diesel School.
Oh.
Denver, Colorado. That was after.
Did you want to, and even coming out of high school, were you thinking of that you wanted to get out of Greenport?
Well,
see something.
I did, but then again, see, when I graduated, there was still the draft.
Oh.
So a lot of guys my age in my class, we were thinking about, we got...
For Vietnam?
Yep. We got draft notices. They came and signed you up, whatnot. So, the draft was going on. They called a number, you had to go. I didn't get called. So that was a good thing there. At the time, I was like, I don't know. You're young. You're 17 years old. What do you know? What's going on. And you don't. In hindsight, my dad was a 10-year Army veteran, and he got out in 51. So 20 years earlier, and I just came from the Legion Hall today to do a little stuff. And as a kid growing up, I'm an only son. I was there whenever he was there. Even when I was little, I was there. He was doing different activities with the American Legion. I'm following Dad, so I was there helping out. It was cleaning up the yard. Come on, Carlos, we're going down to Legion Hall. We're going to help clean up from last night's event and whatnot. So I have some pictures of me and my friend Bob working in the kitchen, washing dishes and stuff like that. You know, so it was kind of a wherever my dad went, I was there. You know, so it was growing up was different. Obviously we didn't have the electronics. The first time I ever saw a tape recorder, was this little thing about the size of your radio. They were smaller than that.
Mm-hmm.
It was a little maroon thing. It had two little reels. You had a little microphone. You could turn it on to speak into it, and then play it back and hear yourself. That was futuristic. That was futuristic. So we play it over and over and over and over and over again. So, but I was always wanting to take something apart, always.
And so you went to school in Denver for that right out of high school?
No, it was the year after.
Year after?
It was the year after, I think it was.
How long were you out there?
6 months, I think it was.
6 months?
Yeah.
And
It was good. I mean, I learned a lot.
Yeah.
I still have my books that I got.
Yeah.
I still have tools that they gave us there. I still have all of that stuff, and I kept it. And I kept it doing work. Even then, after I got done, finally got a real job, bought my own car and so on, in Greenport. Yeah.
You came back and got a job.
Yep. And then we had a car, my aunt, my mother's sister. I'm not sure how she attained the car. She had a little Ford, an English Ford, Anglia. It was called Anglia. It was a little blue 2-door, 3-speed standard transmission, 1-barrel carburetor with 4 cylinders. We would ride that. My dad's park yard was big enough we could just ride around in circles in the yard. And if we decided that we wanted to go out on the street and go down to the block and ride around and come back, who cared? We did. Went out my neighbor's driveway, went down the street, turned around, come back. And we were only like 15, 16, if that, And we had, nobody said nothing. You just did it. Hey, Dusty, your kids are out there riding around in cars. Okay. We had our own boat when I was like 16. My dad bought the boat and had a motor. We would go out, take it, we'd park it, go out in the boat. Now, you couldn't do that.
No.
16 years old, 15 years old, take a boat, a rowboat, and go out in the bay. God, no. Well, I took safe boating courses. Like I needed to take safe boating courses, but they gave them at St. Agnes School. Oh. Mr. and Mrs. Bush gave the class safe boating courses. So they get a little certificate saying that you are good to take a boat out or whatever. You know all the right things to do and what not to do if you're out in a boat. So, it was fun,
And what else? You came back and you were in Greenport working. Had you ever gone to the movie theater?
What, Greenport movie theater?
The Greenport movie theater? Oh, yeah. You would go there even in high school?
Oh, yeah. The movie theater was, at Christmas, because the Legion sponsored a bunch of these things. So they had like the Halloween parade and the Christmas parade at the Legion, at the movie theater. Santa Claus would come. There was just one big stage. Mm-hmm. And then there was a balcony up front, up top and whatnot, So if you didn't want to pay to get in, you went up the fire escape to somebody bang on the door. All right, it's Johnny. Go open the door, And then, you get in and you go hang out in the balcony with your buddies and stuff. But yeah, then they would, these little kids dress up in their costumes. They would go on stage and get their little goodie bag, and then go over to the Legion Hall or somewhere, and they had a little party going on. Mm. That was an annual event for all the kids, all the little kids. I don't think they do that anymore.
No,
they don't. But that was always something we always looked forward to. And then watching the movies too. Yeah, watching the movies on the big screen. The really.
It was just the one
big screen
before it was split up.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I haven't been in it since they split it up.
Yeah. What about the drive-in?
Oh, the drive-in. The drive-in too. That that was an adventure. We went with my parents. They took the car. We had an old car, and then not too often. It was a treat to go watch some movie and.
Would you get stuff where you could have snacks? Or?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You would go into, but obviously the person that ran the snack bar, where the projector was, they were neighborhood guys and girls, whatever. You went in there, you got a little popcorn or whatever, and you went back to the car, sat down, watched the movie. They had these hokey little. Scenes where they call them they were like previews or something.
Advertisement?
Yeah, it was kind of an advertisement.
Yeah.
A little clip before, and then there was intermission, where you had to run in and you better get going because everybody else was going in there to go to the bathroom too. And then as we got older, it was like, all right, whose car are we going in? Mm-hmm. Get in the trunk.
Yeah.
And we try to park in the back, okay. You go to the gate, you pay, one guy would pay, and all of a sudden your car was full. Because they were in the back or they jumped over the fence and, and everybody sat down and stuff and had a good time to drive-in theater.
And then in terms of restaurants in the area, Mitchell's was still there, even when you came back from...
Mitchell, yeah, because Mitchell's didn't burn down until 78.
78. Claudio's and...
Right.
Sweet Indulgence.
No.
That wasn't there?
No. The only restaurants that were there, really restaurant type places were, that I can remember, was Mitchell's. Mitchell's was more of a locals place. Mm-hmm. Okay, the local guys had, went in for their cocktail after work, whatever. Claudio's was more of a tourist, upscale place to go eat. Okay, Townsend Manor was pretty much a regular person's place, a local's place. They didn't have that high-end people. I call them that, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They were locals.
Not as many tourists.
They were tourists.
But it attracted more local.
More locals and more of the everyday person. Working class people. Yeah. But that was it. Well, where the post office is now, was a diner. And I remember going there. It's Front Street Station now. Across the street, where Front Street Station is.
From the post office?
Yeah. Or across from the harbor.
Yes.
Okay, next to there's an old building there. Mm-hmm. Where it's Front Street Station. That shell is actually the diner that stood on the south side of the road. Mm. And they moved that in, I want to say, the late 50s, maybe early 60s. Late 50s, just before they built the new post office. Mm. And that post office was around 60, 61. They built that post office that you see now. Yeah. So I remember my dad was like, he was like, all right, Sunday after church we'd go down there and he'd get his coffee and breakfast or whatever. And I would have cereal. I don't know if they still make them. They had cereal in these little boxes. Yes. Where you open the box.
And put the milk in.
Put the milk in it.
Yeah.
I would sit on the stool on the counter. My dad had his coffee and whatnot, and he was talking to everybody. Mm-hmm. And because he worked at the post office since 51, so he knew everybody. Everybody knew him. And I just sat there, 7 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old, having my breakfast, my cereal with milk and a little spoon. Mm-hmm. Eating it, even when I moved it across the street, I remember that, But other restaurants, God, I don't know.
There wasn't too much.
No.
And were there a lot of bars?
Oh, yeah.
was Myers there?
Myers was there.
Early 70s?
Yeah, Myers was there. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Myers, Helen's. There was Helen's, then there was Myers and Helen's next to it, I think. Sure, there was no shortage of bars. That was well, then again, in
that
the
was
60s,
a requirement.
50s, yeah, it is. It was. I mean, there was a lot of commercial fishing. So there was a lot of young people coming off, were working on the boats, 2 days out, 3 days out, come back. And the first place they went to, my father always called them. He said, "Yeah, they're just like drunken sailors. They're out on the whatever, and they got money, they got paid, and they got to go spend it." 18 years old, 19 years old.
Yeah.
You could drink. The age limit was that, and not until when did it, I'm not sure when it went to 21.
I'm not sure, but
It did. It probably in the 70s, in the early
Probably.
mid 70s, somewhere around there. It went to 21
mhm.
because I turned 19. I turned 18 when I went to Colorado, and we was like, "Yeah, we can drink finally." Okay, so we went to Colorado, but Colorado hadn't changed. Still had to be
Oh, you still had to be of a certain age.
21.
Oh,
So we couldn't drink regular beer. You had to drink what they called was 3-2 beer. It was really watered down beer.
watered down.
Yeah, and it's the
It
first
was-
time I ever saw Coors
Oh,
beer. That never went east of the Rockies, or whatever you want to call it there. Yeah. But there was a lot of bars. Yeah, a lot of bars.
and
They had to.
yeah, and at that time, because this was probably like early 70s, that you were in your 20s.
Right.
How was the industry in terms of the maritime?
Well,
'Cause
there was a lot of maritime fishing, but then
that
there was
hadn't collapsed,
not yet.
not yet. But some stuff after
Mitchell's-
the war,
Yeah,
World War II, there were some
downsides.
downsides, but I guess
Well, the Manhattan industry started after the war.
mm,
No, I won't say started. That's when Smith Meal Company bought Greenport Basin and Construction, and I think it was 46 after the war. So they came in. They were the big bunker boats, and they bought that for the purpose of servicing their own equipment. They still unloaded and whatnot over in Napeague and Promised Land, Amagansett. But they came to Greenport to haul the boats out and get work done on it. So there was still a lot of people working in the shipyard. Okay, so but we still had a large. When you went down, because we have pictures of it, when you go down to the waterfront, there were a lot of wooden pleasure boats. Okay, so there's a lot of wooden pleasure boats, and Mitchell's had tons of docks like that. Then we had the oil embargo in 74, I think it was. That put an end to a lot of stuff. That just really, it took years to recoup, to get back that maritime vacation, industry back.
because towards the late 70s and the 80s, I think some people would say it was kind of more of a depressed area,
I won't say depressed.
but just it was more gritty. Not
I've
even
heard
good.
that too.
Yeah, I've heard that.
too. But you know what? If you never went anywhere else, you would think so.
Okay.
Okay? You would think so.
Yeah.
But then again, for Greenport, who is so vibrant, yes, it was on the downside. Towards that time, it wasn't as vibrant. It took a long time to revive that, and I think it still hasn't.
Fully.
No, if you go to Sag Harbor,
Yeah.
even 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and now in the summertime, they're packed with boats. It took a long time for the waterfront here to get back to that packed with pleasure boats and so on, unless it's a special occasion, but Sag Harbor, they just stay there.
Yeah.
It's a different, for some reason, their government adapted better.
You think that's, well, with it being on the South Fork?
Two,
Might
Yeah.
have- yeah.
Also, yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, it helped a lot, and then it's how their government presented itself and promoted itself, Whereas
That
Greenport-
probably was, I don't know if you wanted to say, I mean, I'm not sure, but maybe it was, I think it always had been it had always been a nice place.
yeah.
I don't know if it was rediscovered at some point with people moving out and more money coming in compared to Greenport. That might have came more later into the 90s or 2000s here.
I would say it did. Sag Harbor was always any waterfront property
Mm-hmm.
was much could survive better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They did, and anyone, you know, Greenport had more industry. Sag Harbor didn't had more pleasure boats. I don't think Sag Harbor had in whaling days they did, but that's like 100 years earlier or
Yeah.
more. Okay, but as far as pleasure boats or commercial fishing, commercial boat building, and so things like that, Greenport had far more than anything around.
Mm.
That was it. It was that was there. That was go to Greenport. You need something work done. I mean, you got to remember before Mitchell's was there, that whole waterfront was nothing but shipyards.
When did Mitchell's go in?
I think it was 40 something.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
It was all shipyards before. I mean, it was all ships and.
Yeah, on the backside, yeah, the waterfront, up till about the 30s, it was all shipyards, boatyards, and so on like that. Wooden Chute, Albertson, not Albertson. Was it Albertson? I'm trying to think the name of it. But yeah, that day there were a lot of boatyards and things like that there on the waterfront. Not more commercial than recreational. Right at the end of where it says Art White's Bait Shop, or right at the end of First Street here, toward the end you go across, was a machine shop where the blacksmith place is. The blacksmith place was actually part of a boatyard. The original was part of a blacksmith shop for a boatyard. Then it became, the boatyards faded, and that guy Meyer, and then Noselik
Yes.
took over and whatnot, and it became what it is now.
Mm-hmm.
But it was slowly deteriorating because the buildings was 100 years old, and but if you went down towards Strait, where that camera obscura and things are there, that was all waterfront boatyard. There was I think it was called Hayes. Hayes's machine shop, and then there was Hals's Motors. There was all kinds of anything to do with marine
Was all there.
was all down there. Yeah. Mitchell's building was part of Wooden Chute, and then after Wooden Chute, it became a car dealer. Hilaire Campbell, I think the guy's name is. He was the guy who brought in Ford.
Before it became a restaurant?
Yes. Yep. It was I think it was Hilaire Campbell. He was the Ford dealer. And then before that, across from IGA, where there's a beauty shop, that was another car dealer. You see across from where that used to be Antiques nautical thing.
Yeah.
In the corner is a brick building.
Mm-hmm.
It's a hairdressing place. That was an auto dealer there. So Greenport had, when we were just talking, how many gas stations were in Greenport? How busy was it? There were a lot. What, we got one?
One or two.
The one up here.
And Mr. Roberts.
Mr. Roberts. And over there by the bus company.
Yeah.
Where next to the movie theater, there was one on the east side of the movie theater. There was one on the corner. Sinclair. There was one where Bridgehampton Bank is. And this is going into the 50s and 60s. Okay, so there was the one, Mr. Roberts, the one and they had different owners, different names over time. So with the pizza places that's no longer there north of the auditorium, there's
that was a gas station.
That was a gas station. Yep. That was Mr. Hubbard, the mayor, and Hubbard, and I can't remember the other guy's name off the top of my head. But yeah, they converted that to a gas station. It was a house. It was a home, and they converted it to a gas station. Now across the street, on the other corner, was another gas station. That was a gas station also. It was a Gulf station and repair shop. Now, where you see the store that's called Halaya or whatever it is,
Yes.
okay, next to Hoppy's Cleaners, that whole, from the Hoppy's Cleaners to the corner, was Hollowarden Florists. And they went out of business. Kalin, Hollowarden and then Kalin moved up to McMahon Price. They kept the florist business going, but that was a gas station at one point too. So, you know.
That was a lot.
Then there was, where the bus company is, next to the office on the north side, was Fred Hulse. He had a Sinclair station, so, and repair shop, gas station. It go down a little further, you could see the remnants of a gas station. There's a garage. That guy sells junk there or whatever, furniture.
Yeah.
But not, that was, I think it was Harry Bub gas station. That was a gas station.
Next to DeJesus?
No, way before that.
Oh,
Next
before
to before the state yard.
Okay.
The state yard there. And then
Yeah.
you see an old building that has two big doors and stuff. A lot of junk around.
Mm-hmm.
That was Harry Bub's gas station.
Okay.
So he had that for years. And service station. He worked on cars, and then of course the one up here. But then one of the originals was, as you go north on Main Street, across from the traffic light, there was a gas station there, and that's going back in the 20s.
Wow.
In the 20s and 30s, somewhere around there. So yeah, there was a lot of gas stations. So it was an active place. And I think the gas stations started to close after the oil embargo and stuff.
Yeah.
I remember that. That was crazy. Odd even. You can only get gas if you had a license plate number ended on certain days, right? If you had an odd number, you can get it on Monday and Wednesday or something. If you added an even number, you can only get it on Tuesday or Thursday. It was some kind of crazy thing like that. Rationing. Well, they did rationing during the war too, but so yeah, and it's
And even after that, and after the Mitchells burned down, that area was kind of in flux. So they had, some people have said they had little events there with people, they fling people into the...
Oh, they tried different things, yeah. Bungee jumping was one of the
jumping, but
crazy
they
things.
weren't sure. But if you drove through the town after that, it didn't...
Pretty abandoned.
The town looked not...
Right, because it was just bare. They did nothing to improve it. Mitchell's had a hotel in the back. Okay, so it was like when you go into that, behind the Aldo's, so back there was a 2-story building that was actually a hotel. And they had gas pumps out front too. There was a hotel, a 2-story building that had tall columns that lengthwise going towards the water. And there was a bar there too. They had somebody that opened up a bar called Kokomo's upstairs. It was a kind of a wild place. It had a reputation on the Saturday night, Friday night, a lot of activity happening out there. But then again, that's, young people needed a place to go and blow off steam and stuff. So, yeah.
And then what about in the 80s?
Well, by the 80s, I was grown up. I got married in 78, but my wife and I we went to school together. We were in the same class.
Wow.
We graduated the same year, the same class. So,
And,
it was...
so what year was that?
71 I graduated.
You graduated 71?
Right. But we started dating in 76, I think it was.
So it wasn't, right? It wasn't in high school or after high school?
No. It was after high school, yeah. But, it was funny because we knew each other because of school and stuff. Yeah. And, but we didn't know that her grandfather, Al Ryder, sold 2 fishing boats to my grandfather, who only lived 3 houses apart. He worked in the shipyard. He worked in the oyster in business and so on. So yeah, so he was a boat guy, and everything revolved when they were growing up around the water. The oyster factory, the fish factories and so on. So yeah, everybody. And then my aunts and uncles, when we got engaged and met told everybody that, it's like, oh, I went to school with your aunt. Me and your uncle were in the same class. I was like, really? And that's going back into the 30s. The 30s and 40s that, my father's family. My father would have graduated in 38.
Yeah.
So his older sisters or younger sisters and brothers went to school with my wife's same family and so on.
Yeah.
So it's kind of it was good.
Yeah.
I always ask that question. I asked that question when I was young, when I was little, to my aunts and uncles. What was it like when you were growing up? And they all said the same thing. We all got along. We were not the same. We were not, we were all from different backgrounds.
Whether it was a religion or ethnicity or
right. Everything was different.
Race.
But they all walked to school together. They all played together. But, they all got along. They all got along. It was all friends and stuff. So it was kind of like, no kidding, really? There were dark sides before the 70s and stuff, in the 50s and the 60s. I'll leave you with this. I know from my growing up in the 60s, being a young guy in his teens and early teens and stuff like that, in the 60s, that 3rd Street, as we know it now, is not like it is. 3rd Street is more cleaned up. But every neighborhood changes no matter where you go in this country, in the city. Every neighborhood changes. But in the 50s, I want to say in the 50s, maybe, I don't know if so much in the 40s, but in the 50s and the 60s, 3rd Street, for the most part, was mostly African-American families. But then again, if you look earlier in the 30s and 20s, it was mostly white neighborhood and families. So some dynamics changed where, families changed, moved, others came, depression, the depression in the 20s and so on, and different things like that.
You think some of the African Americans moved to the area
for work?
For work, with the migration from the South.
Right, for work.
Yeah.
During the war.
Yeah, so, and then they kind of, you're saying maybe by 3rd Street, they kind of moved into that area.
But that's true with all ethnicities.
Yes.
If you go into New York, there's different neighborhoods that are strictly Italian, strictly Irish,
Chinese, Jewish, and some of them, whether they were Italian now or Chinese now, they were probably Irish there before, Jewish there before, and then English and Dutch.
Right.
So it's
constantly evolving.
Different neighborhoods evolved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. And in our case, in Greenport, one of the things that changed our dynamics, or the North Fork actually, is the World War II. Is because they draft after December 7th. We entered the war as per the president, and so the draft was enacted, and all the young men had to go to war. So now we had lots of farms. There was a lot of potato farms, cauliflower farms, a lot of farms, and all of a sudden, hey, who's going to, help on the farm, run the machinery? So that's what this gentleman wrote that book about, Dust for something like that, recently, a couple of years ago. Torres is his name. He wrote the book. And then that's a story that the North Fork is not told. Greenport, Orient, Southold, Cutchogue, that's not really known, but then they were migrant camps. So migrants came from the South to work on the farms. And then they, just like they came and worked on the bunker boats, they still needed people to work on the boats because everybody went off to war or whatever else. And so they needed families. So there were a lot. If you look at a lot of pictures of the bunker boat industry, there's a lot of African-American men on the boat. And they came from the South. And I think the government even ran a program to show these people how to do it. But then again, there's a lot of white folks that came from the South also, from the fishing area of Chincoteague in Virginia, and they came up and worked. So they came in, worked, went to school, their kids went to school and so on, and then became part of the community. And here we are. There are still people that came for that reason, and all descendants of those people still here in that community.
Yeah.
And so on. So it's kind of like everything evolves. And I'm going to say, yeah, it got, I won't say it got depressed, but then again, what area didn't?
You could look at multiple areas across the country, and
right.
A lot of areas, even in the 70s or 80s, had, whether it was inner cities or towns, just struggling.
I'll tell you what opened my eyes when I used to work for. When I first started the buses in the early '80s. We used to go to the Catskills. Now, the Jewish community in New York, in the early part of the 20th century, 1900s, they went north by train to the Catskills. Okay, and there's tons of Jewish communities spread throughout the Catskills. Okay, so for some reason they went there, and then there were others who went to the Jersey Shore and so on. But a large number, when the train came out and started coming out here, they were advertised, go out to the East End in the fresh air, the salt water, and the recreational fishing and so on came here, which changed, people bought summer homes after the war, got it cheap, the GI Bill, and a lot of those that were summer homes became permanent homes. And then they settled, and those families are still here. So it's kind of like all that, I think we did pretty good. We did really well. We're still here.
Yeah.
We're still here.
But I was going to ask just kind of where you, was there kind of a resurgence or some, I don't know if you want to say gentrification, but in the 90s and into the 2000s, whether it was the redevelopment of Mitchell Park and new people moving out here, whether it's from the city?
I'm going to say, because in the 90s, I was still working. I was driving a bus. But in the 70s, I worked for Jonas Moving and Storage. We did a lot of work on the South Fork, summer homes, people, things like that. And we also did a lot of moving in this direction on the North Fork. Jonas they started, I think, in the 50s sometime as a moving and storage company. Mm. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I want to say it was maybe the mid to late 50s that Tom Jonas started this business. So people started coming out, but later on in the 80s and the 90s, you started seeing people retire out here more. I think in the 70s or late 70s, the retirement communities started growing on the eastern end of Long Island, more on the north side than on the south side. So you saw that. And then you started seeing more stores, more of the box stores and so on, less of the little mom and pop shops.
Yes.
So when people move, and they do, and they come, they bring their changes with them. Mm-hmm. And you hear that people say, well, if you wanted to live like that, why didn't you just stay where you were? Mm-hmm. You had it there. Now you brought it here, and now you're complaining that other people are moving here and messing things up. Well, you messed things up when you came here. Mm-hmm. If you would have left it alone, we'd still be a quiet community. But you can't do that. You can't do that. You got to grow. And if you don't, it's the old saying, you can't live with them, you can't live without them.
Yeah.
You can't. It's modern technology.
And we're still getting, it's still more people. Yep. It's changed even since COVID.
Yep. Oh, COVID made a big change only a few years ago. But then, I think always people looked, and I ask this question at the Historical Society, and people come in, I always ask them, where do you come from? I want to know, just curious. What brought you out here? Well, my parents used to come out here, used to come out in the summertime. We like it. I remember growing up as a kid in the summertime, and we came back when we wanted to spend our time here, So, yeah, it always is. But then that's true everywhere.
And is there anything that you miss about the way it
The old days?
used to be?
No. Anything I missed about the old days? Well, I would say I loved hardware stores.
We don't have
Hardware
a
stores.
hardware store.
The old hardware stores, like Wash White's hardware store. That was like walking through there was like it was just great. The smell. We don't have those stores anymore. You can't walk through the store and just you knew where you were. You could close your eyes if somebody walked you into there. You knew where you were. Those kind of places you don't have anymore. It's just not there. It's unfortunate. Same with arcade. I remember being a little kid at the arcade store. They had a certain smell to it. When you went in that store, and then it's just the way it was. You went in and that you knew what it was like. That I do miss. Other than that, being able to go out on the water. I wish I could one day. That's on my bucket list. Get in a boat and just go out, a small boat, and just go out and sit. And that's it. One day I'm going to do that. Sit. And then just relax, enjoy the time. Walk. I don't like walking through the woods anymore. I used to walk. We used to play. We used to go into woods. Moore's Woods, and go and play, or go into in the wintertime go ice skating on the pond in the cemetery. But you can't do that anymore. We don't get the winters to do that.
It's not cold enough.
No, it's not cold enough. But, it was always fun going through these places. I wish you could. The waterfront's not what it used to be. It's just not. The old commercial fishing boats and stuff like that, I would love to see during a maritime festival actual commercial old draggers or trawlers come. So people could see that, see what it was like. It wasn't all pleasure boats.
Yachts
and so on, fiberglass and whatnot. People actually worked on deck with their hands and so on. So I'd love to see that happen again sometime. It would be something that the younger, even yourself, you never seen it.
No.
You would know. You would get a feel for what it was like. Some of the buildings, just aesthetically to look at, some people come and say, "Oh wow, look at that building." Well, it was built in the 50s. Very few buildings are really going back to the early 1900s. There are a few.
A lot of them didn't make it.
Burned, changed. It was called improvement, so on. So yeah, they didn't make it. I would like to see that. If I could control historic preservation,
kind of restore some of those buildings.
Yeah. If you're going to build a new building, make the front of it. It's just like a false front. Like the movie theater, like the movie scenes. They built false fronts. The back of it was just blank.
Yeah.
But then when you rode in, you saw what it's like.
Yes.
That would be interesting to me. Sterlington is one, that building, that goes back to the early, I'm not going to say, or late 1800s maybe.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. There are some buildings that are still.
When you say Sterlington,
where the bagel place is.
That building goes back? Oh.
Yeah. Not the one next to it. Not the little one next to it, to the south side where the deli is.
Yeah.
But the one with the two porches and stuff, that one.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that one goes back that far. And the two buildings on the corner past the pizza place, they're old. They're going back into the early 1900s. So it's kind of like, as far as Main Street goes, the Reeves building and the two buildings there, they're really old. They're really old.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, the corner building where the It's called Saltwater. That three-story building.
Yeah.
That's a 1900 building.
Early.
1900. I think
Yeah.
it was 1903 or something
Oh.
around there.
But that was built differently
right.
than some of the other one-story wood.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, that one's older.
Yeah, it is. It is.
And how did you get interested in history and the Sterling Historical Society of Greenport?
How? Oh boy, that's a good one for another. I'll tell you how.
You want to just hold off on
Well, I'll tell you how, and then we'll go into it later. I did it because my family came here. My father's family came here to Greenport in 1840. Say 1840. So either 41, somewhere around there. Okay, so and they came to Greenport from Setauket or Nissaquag. And they, Sells family, so they came here then. So I started doing research about my father's mother's family and how they got here to Greenport. I was curious. I was told they were Native Americans, they were Indians, and so on. Really, let me check this out. Turns out they were part of the Montauk and the Nissaquag tribes. So that there was truth to that, but I had to dig it up and find out for myself. So as I was digging, I found other stories that were interesting about Greenport. And I said to myself, wow, that's cool. So I started digging some more. And then I heard that my grandmother, my father's mother, played for the silent movies. And I said, really? I remember as a little kid, they had a piano and she played beautifully. And then what do you call it? I said, well, how true is that? And I did find an actual paper in the paper that she was the pianist for the movie.
Mm-hmm.
But then I found more that her whole family, her brothers and brothers and everything, they were all musicians. I said, wow, that's cool. Let me see how that ties into Greenport. And so I started digging deeper and deeper and deeper. Then I started finding a little bit things that were not quite right or not correct. I said, wait a minute, I didn't read that this way. Something's wrong with this story here. Somebody either told the story wrong or copied it wrong or whatever else. So I started digging further and further. Then you find incidents that happened with families, people, because they published more personal things in the newspaper. Divorce,
mm-hmm.
wills, why this guy got divorced and why he only gave his cat money. Crazy things like that. That you don't see that in the paper anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then, things like that. I said, wow, that's cool. So I started digging up a little bit more and more and more. And then Prohibition, my grandfather and other people and my wife's family, and then it just snowballed, and I'm still doing it.
Mm.
And one of the other reasons was because we were sitting right here in the library.
Mm-hmm.
I read that the library had a big storage. It was the original building when Grace built it was in order to have a place to keep historical records. And I don't know if we're in the historical room, but that was one of the purposes that she had for building the library,
mm-hmm.
other than the literary society taking up residence and whatnot, but to have a history place to store history of Greenport. And that was in 1917? So, and I said, wow. And when I went looking for information, couldn't find it. It was that disorganized. So I went to Historical Society, and they were even more disorganized. and I won't say maybe they weren't disorganized as far as their record keeping is different than our record keeping.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't very well. It was kept in homes instead of in a building, because the building didn't take place until the Ireland House and it was moved and used in mid-70s and didn't open until 79. So they had meetings when it started in 46. So where did all this stuff go?
Mm.
It went to the people who were in the organization to their homes. So it disappeared, basically. Nobody knows. I've asked over and over people, well, yeah, John Doe had it, and he used to keep it, and so now it's gone. Some of it shows back up, but over the years, they've had people say, hey, I got this, this used to be, part of the Historical Society and stuff. So I started digging more and more and more. And then when at work, I would go to the archives, National Archives in Washington, D.C., and looking at microfilm and things like that before they had these newfangled machines, and the internet, when they started doing things. And I just keep digging and digging and digging and digging. I've gotten to be, although, like I told you before, this new way that they changed their library digital format.
The New York historic papers.
Yeah.
It's harder to search for.
No, searching is easy. Searching is easy, I find, because I found and I read how you word your search, and you narrow it down, makes it easier. And I've gotten a lot better at it. But their new site is harder to keep what you're looking for.
Save it.
Yeah, hard to save it, So.
Yeah.
But there are lots of things, that I'm looking at all these books. One of these days, I want to go through all these books.
Yeah.
I want to go through everything. The more I keep feeding into my head, one day, if you allow me to sit here quietly.
Sure. Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 24 with Carlos DeJesus. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.